sort of love that kind of wistful feeling at the end where you're already feeling a sense of nostalgia for the summer you just had. I'm already going through the memories that I had from June and July, and I'm already sad to see them go, and I'm starting to think about a more serious season in September happening. I mean, it not only sort of is about that, it sounds like it. I mean, this is a song that sounds like salt, air, and rust, two things that she sings about. That sort of oxidized quality of summer. I love that kind of Cape Cod-y, wistful end of summer feeling when you know you only have a few weeks left or a few days left, and so you really appreciate it in a totally different way. But that in and of itself can be kind of sad.
Meet Me Behind the Mall is a line that just does me in. I don't know what it is about August. That song also just hits so hard for me. God, yeah. God, I love it. So 2026, what is your song of the summer this year? There's so much debate over what the real one is. Let me get your opinion on that, Alex.
If you're asking from a cultural zeitgeist point of view, to me, there's no question that it's Ella Langley's Choosing Texas. I mean, this song has been a behemoth. In terms of my own personal life, I keep coming back to Olivia Rodrigo. Every time I sort of step away from that record, I find myself pulled back. And it's funny because just yesterday I had her song Begged, which is, again, a really heartbroken ballad. It's just on loop, on repeat, and I'm in a good mood. But something about this summer has lent itself towards that kind of sort of, I don't know, sad wistfulness.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio One, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on the CBC Manitoba YouTube page. I'm Corey Funk, in for Marcy Marcusa. Good to be with you. I hope you had yourselves a lovely weekend. Happy Monday. Let's say hello now to the wonderful crew helping put together today's show. Jenica Sewell is our studio technician. Sierra Sanders is our studio director. And Darren Morash is our YouTube producer this morning. Good morning, everyone. Let's also say good morning now to Heather Wells, who's in with news headlines. Hi.
Hi there. Good morning. Well, the head of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce says he was shocked and disappointed when trade talks collapsed and new tariffs were imposed. As we've been hearing, it happened early Saturday. U.S. tariffs of 50% on nearly $30 billion worth of Canadian goods kicked in. The Chamber's president and CEO, Lauren Remillard, says the federal government has previously announced supports for businesses and workers, and more financial help may be needed, he says, to weather this latest storm. Now, honey producers in this province say they will feel the sting of those tariffs. Ian Stepler at Manitoba Beekeepers Association says this comes at a terrible time, right when producers are in the middle of harvest. We'll hear more coming up in our next local news at 6:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That is Heather Wells at your CBC News Desk. And as you can imagine, we're going to have coverage of those, the fallouts from those failed negotiations on Friday, the new tariffs. What does that mean for Manitoba throughout the show today? And speaking of honey, we are going to hear from a Manitoba honey farmer who fears he actually might lose his family business because of these tariffs. So stay tuned for that after 7 o'clock. Also coming up this first hour here on the show, the world's oldest verifiable living person is a British woman who just turned 117 years old. We're going to talk to an expert about superagers and the key to extreme longevity. Also, first up on the show, the Ukrainian community in Manitoba gathered to commemorate Ukrainian Independence Day. So we're going to take you there, and we're also going to get the latest on those failed trade negotiations, what this means going forward. That and much, much more coming up this next hour on Information Radio. Stay tuned.
Today on Q.
Casey Musgraves is an 8-time Grammy winner, considered one of the finest songwriters of her generation. And in a rare interview, she talks about her journey from championship yodeler to winning Album of the Year at the Grammys and the inspiration behind her latest album.
Q. This morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Martina Fitzgerald. Canadians are entering a new work week under a new trade war. Over the weekend, fresh 50% U.S. tariffs kicked in on $28 billion worth of Canadian exports. Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will respond dollar for dollar after Labor Day. He's also expected to announce new supports for the Canadian businesses hit hard by this trade dispute. The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian joins us from Ottawa. Rafi, there are no further meetings scheduled between the Canadian and U.S. trade negotiators. Where do things stand this morning?
Martina, we know there is still some level of contact between U.S.-Canada Trade Relations Minister Dominic LeBlanc and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer, but it is striking to me that the Prime Minister said quite openly there are no current plans to get back to the negotiating table. Simultaneously, he did not enact these counter tariffs right away. This 2-week window is almost a stick that could turn into an olive branch if the Americans decide they do want to talk after all. As for when Canadians might get a sense of how local businesses here will be supported, there's certainly a sense of urgency. Here's Lisa Raitt, who's a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on U.S.-Canada relations and a former Conservative cabinet minister herself.
He really can't stall on that. Whoever is devising and developing these programs better have them ready to go Monday morning, because I can tell you where I work, clients are already calling and asking, what are we going to do?
We are expecting to hear from Prime Minister Carney later today.
As you know, Rafi, there's also pressure from the opposition for more transparency from Ottawa regarding this deal that was rejected. What can you tell us about that?
So Carney did share some details. He alluded to the U.S. refusing to exempt heavy-duty trucks from auto tariffs or going after Canadian protections on language and culture, for example. But that's not enough for the opposition Conservatives. Their U.S.-Canada relations critic Shuv Majumdar says releasing the full text of the agreement would reassure the country that walking away was the right choice.
It's incumbent on the Prime Minister to build that trust with the public and with the opposition by releasing the full text of what had been negotiated. We're not asking for secret aspects of the deal or negotiation tactics. That's not something that we want to undermine the government or Canada with. But the Canadian public deserves to know exactly what the deal was, so they should release the deal.
The Conservatives are also calling for Parliament to reconvene immediately to discuss both the agreement and what supports might look like, Martina.
The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian in Ottawa. Thank you, Rafi.
You're welcome.
As Rafi mentioned, there is no sense of when Canada and the U.S. could officially reconvene talks. To the contrary, both sides are digging in, and that's even with Americans facing the prospect of tariff-related price hikes coming ahead of midterm elections in November. Steve Futterman reports.
While Donald Trump said very little this weekend, his transportation secretary on Sunday was in full attack mode.
It's a country that doesn't have a military. It has a country that has a single-payer healthcare system that's failing.
Sean Duffy said the tariffs will be devastating for the Canadian economy and predicted Mark Carney will be forced to come back to the negotiating table. Duffy's comments about the military brought some quick blowback. Retired former U.S. commanding general in Europe, Ben Hodges, characterized them as embarrassing. There is plenty of vocal opposition to the tariffs. These comments on Sunday by former Vice President Mike Pence.
My hope is, for the sake of American families, that what we're looking at here is negotiation and not confrontation.
And with the midterm elections a bit more than 2 months away, it could hurt some Republican candidates.
His policies are actively compounding the problem they elected him to solve, which was getting control of their cost of living.
CNN political analyst Ron Brownstein says many voters are blaming Trump for rising prices. Already one Republican senator facing a tough re-election battle, Susan Collins of Maine, is critical of the tariffs. She says they will increase costs for those in her state. Steve Futterman, CBC News, Los Angeles.
The diplomatic friction between Ottawa and Washington was on full display with the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Now, new documents obtained by CBC News show the American owner of a competing key route met with senior Canadian officials prior to the bridge's opening. Colin Butler has this exclusive report.
I don't know that there is a comparable.
Lori Troutman studies the Canada-U.S. border at Western Washington University. She's talking about Windsor, Detroit, where the privately owned Ambassador Bridge now sits beside the publicly owned Gordie Howe Bridge.
It creates a whole different layer, I think, of diplomacy. It's not necessarily about better accessibility or more efficiency for trade flows. It's about profit.
CBC News has learned that as the Gordie Howe prepared to open, senior Canadian government officials met privately in April with the ambassador's American owner Matthew Maroon at his request. The details contained in briefing notes obtained by CBC through the Access to Information Act. But much of what was discussed remains blacked out. Maroon didn't respond to a request for comment. What we do know is 11 days after the meeting, the Ambassador Bridge lowered its tolls below the rates of Gordie Howe.
It's not surprising.
That's University of Windsor political science professor John Sutcliffe. The Maroon family fought for decades to protect its lucrative Ambassador Bridge monopoly. They couldn't stop the Gordie Howe.
I mean, you have a classic case of a moving from a monopoly situation to one where there's competition and therefore prices come down.
Ottawa says the meeting was routine. The circumstances, though, were anything but. A billionaire, a new competitor, a bridge caught in a fight with the White House. Ottawa listened, but what Maroon wanted them to hear remains secret. Colin Butler, CBC News, London, Ontario.
In Ukraine,
35-та річниця. Державне свято.
President Volodymyr Zelensky addresses his nation as it marks 35 years of separation from the Soviet Union. Zelensky says Ukrainians know the value of independence as they fight against Russian aggression, adding his country wants peace. He will not give in. British Prime Minister Andy Burnham is among the world leaders attending Independence Day ceremonies in Kyiv. He's there to chair his first meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, which Canada is also part of. New Zealand's government is taking steps to ban social media for kids under 16.
And I won't pretend that it will be simple or that it will be perfect. We won't get every single child off social media. Some will always find ways around it. But frankly, it's just way too important not to at least try.
Prime Minister Christopher Luxon called out tech giants such as Meta, TikTok, and Snapchat for exposing young people to harmful and addictive content. He has tabled new legislation today that would require social media platforms to verify the ages of users through things like facial recognition or digital IDs. New Zealand has a coalition government. It's not clear if other parties will support the bill. Canada tabled similar legislation in June. Experts in Canada say social media is also playing a role in the declining mental health of teens here. The findings, part of new data out this morning, gathered from thousands of Ontario students. As Tashana Reid explains, researchers say while mental health struggles for youth are still prevalent, there are signs a shift may be happening.
Schools closed, their friends are asleep, their parents are asleep, and there's nobody else.
Kids Help Phone says more and more young people are reaching out for help at night when they feel most alone. In the first half of this year, Canada's free mental health crisis service says it saw a 24% increase in the volume of overnight texts compared to last year. Rebecca Shields is CEO of Kids Help Phone.
And predominantly the number one issue is anxiety and stress.
Something also looked at in a new report by the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. It took a closer look at the health of 10,000 students in Ontario between grades 7 and 12. In an anonymous online survey, 46% of students reported experiencing moderate to serious levels of psychological distress. A slight decrease, says Haley Hamilton, a senior scientist at CAMH.
So the numbers that we're seeing now in 2025 is more similar to the number that we saw in 2019, pre-pandemic.
Researchers don't know why there's been a decrease, but say distress levels are still nearly double compared to over a decade ago.
I think it's recognizing that we still have a long way to go.
Shields says social media, AI, online bullying, and exploitation has made things even more challenging for today's youth.
Young people, are resilient, but they're also faced with unprecedented challenges, and that's why we all have to work together to ensure that they have the support that they need.
Researchers say more students also reported speaking with a professional for their mental health, an encouraging sign. Tashana Reid, CBC News, Toronto.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. For news anytime, go to cbcnews.ca. I'm Martina Fitzgerald. This is CBC News.
Well, good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio One, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on the CBC Manitoba YouTube page. I'm Corey Funk, in for Marcy Marcusa. Happy Monday. It's August 24th. Hope you had yourselves a lovely weekend. 17 right now in Winnipeg, heading for a high today of 26 with a chance of thunderstorms this morning. We'll get you details just ahead. But coming up this hour on the show, want to live a longer and healthier life. We're going to look at what the science reveals about extreme longevity. There's a woman, the longest living woman that we know of now is in Britain. She's 117 years old. We're going to hear about her, how she's managed to live that long. Also, new American tariffs are now in effect on Canadian goods. Canada plans to retaliate with tariffs of its own, but how long can businesses and consumers keep their elbows up while bearing the economic repercussions? We're going to have that conversation coming up this half hour on Information Radio. Also, the Ukrainian community in Manitoba gathered to commemorate Ukrainian Independence Day. We're going to bring you there, so stay tuned for that. But right now, 6:11, let's check in with Heather Wells with a look at news headlines.
Good morning. Well, a woman is raising questions about ID scanners and privacy after she was flagged by a Winnipeg bar as a nationwide public safety concern. It happened during a visit to Riverside Bar in June. After a couple of drinks, Alexandra, we're only using her first name, felt sick and ran to the washroom. The next month, a venue at the Calgary Stampede scanned her ID and denied her entry. That Winnipeg bar had created a public flag across the country. We'll hear about it coming up. As well, Manitoba's U.S. Trade Council meets this afternoon to talk about that trade war with the U.S. and the 50% tariffs imposed. Members of the council come from a range of industries. Bram Strain at the Business Council of Manitoba says they'll discuss impacts to specific businesses and supports to help them weather the storm. I'll be back with more Manitoba news coming up at 6:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That's Heather Wells at your CBC News Desk. And speaking of specific businesses, coming up after 7, we're going to speak with a third-generation honey farmer here in Manitoba who's worried that he might actually lose his business because of these tariffs. We're going to hear why coming up after 7 o'clock. But right now, let's just take a look at your weather. Right now in Winnipeg at the Forks at 17. We're heading for a high today of 26. About a 60% chance of showers this morning. And then we're going to see about a mix of sun and cloud throughout the day. There is a risk of a thunderstorm this morning as well. Not too windy, but a bit windy. Wind the south 20 kilometers an hour, gusting to 40. And then once again, you can expect a high of 26. Then overnight, it's going to be 70% chance of thunderstorms. Overnight in the evening, it's going to clear as you get closer to the morning. And then tomorrow, we're warming up to 22 with another risk of thunderstorm tomorrow as well. Well, let's check in now with Sierra Sanders, who's in with a look at your commute. Hi.
Hi, Corey. Not too much going on out there here as we kick off this Monday edition of the show. But I want to remind folks of the number to call if there is something that is getting in your way or there's a situation that you run into while you're on your commute today. No matter how you are getting around, no matter where you are in the province, I would love to hear from you. So give me a call on the CBC commuter line. That number is 204-788-3093.
Well, up first here on Information Radio, the Ukrainian community in Manitoba gathered last night to commemorate Ukrainian Independence Day. Hundreds gathered at the Beer Can in Winnipeg to mark the day. Orest Kapp is with Ukrainian Canadian Congress of Manitoba, and he spoke with CBC Radio Canada's Maggie Wilcox at the event yesterday.
Well, as you know, it's the 35th anniversary of Ukrainian independence. It's an important event. In fact, it's a historical event. It's happening around the world where the Ukrainian diaspora is. And it's an opportunity basically to commemorate and from a happy perspective also celebrate the event because of the independence of the Ukraine. especially also now since the Russian invasion. We're looking at the 5th year now that this is occurring. And so it's a more even important event for the Ukrainian community, especially here in Manitoba and Winnipeg, to have a chance to jointly celebrate the event with Ukraine, actually.
And we were talking to some of the people selling and raising money over there. They were saying they don't feel like Ukraine's getting forgotten, but so many other things are happening in the world right now. It's sometimes not in the news as much. Are you worried that people are going to lose sight of what's happening over there?
There's always a tendency of people over time to forget certain events, and so this event is an example of where we celebrate, but at the same time it gives us an opportunity to raise funds for humanitarian aspects, possibly military aspects, any need that the Ukrainian community in Ukraine may have via Canada.
And events like this for Independence Day have been going on for 35 years, then I take it, here in Winnipeg?
Well, absolutely. You're correct. The event is happening. It has been repeated on a yearly basis since the independence. So it is an annual event. And as I indicated before, it's an opportunity for us to celebrate, to remind us of what is happening also in the Ukraine, and to assist with any humanitarian aid that Ukraine may have. So we want to make sure they're not forgotten.
That was Orest Kapp, a spokesperson for the Ukrainian Canadian Congress of Manitoba, speaking with Radio Canada's Maggie Wilcox. Well, time now is 6:16 here on Information Radio, and you feel that chill in the air a little bit in the evenings. It's you even kind of started to smell more of that harvest season in the air. It's just around the corner, and if you planted fruits and vegetables in your garden, you may be gearing up to start preserving them to enjoy year round. But it's always important to do that preservation safely so there's no contamination in your canned goods. Botulism is an illness that can happen when food or drink you consume isn't properly preserved. It's caused by a toxin produced when certain bacteria are given the perfect conditions to thrive, while symptoms like vomiting and fatigue can show up quickly in some. Others may not feel sick until more than a week after consuming contaminated food or drink. And back in September of 2023, CBC's Faith Fundal had a conversation about safe canning with Getty Stewart. We thought we'd play you that for you now. She is a professional home economist and cookbook author.
So meat, seafood, and any low-acid vegetables. So if you're not pickling your vegetables, they should be pressure canned. So Clostridium botulinum is the bacteria that we're talking about, and its spores form if you don't have a lot of acid, if you have a low oxygen environment, which when you're canning, that's what you're creating is low oxygen, and when there's lots of liquid in that can. So you're creating the perfect environment if you don't add the acid to create the opportunity for Clostridium botulinum spores to grow. So it's quite simply use high acid foods, add acid, and heat process low acid veggies, meat, and fish in a pressure canner.
What would be a good example of some of those things that would work well?
So, for example, right now, a lot of us are harvesting our tomatoes. And while we perceive tomatoes to taste quite acidic, they're actually considered a borderline acidic vegetable. So this is a vegetable where if we are going to hot water bath process, which many of us home canners do, we need to add acid to our canned tomatoes. If we're making salsa, we have to be very careful how many low acid ingredients we're adding, like hot peppers, sweet peppers, onions, celery, etc. Those are all low acid vegetables. We need to follow a tested recipe that's been proven to make sure that we have the right acid levels, and then we can safely can those.
For pressure canning, are people able to use things like instant pots, like pressure cookers?
No, an electric pressure cooker and a pressure canner are two different types of equipment, and an electric pressure cooker is regulated differently than a pressure canner that you would put on the stove. So the heat fluctuates on and off on a pressure cooker like an Instant Pot, whereas a pressure canner operates a little bit differently and can hold a consistent, steady temperature and pressure level. So you really should be using a pressure canner, not an Instant Pot.
Sounds like this can be, there's the potential for this to be quite complicated. Are there ways for people to figure out whether or not, say, a recipe that they find is safe and the method is the proper way of doing it?
Absolutely. I highly recommend that if you're looking for a recipe that uses low acid veggies like peas and beans and squash and carrots, or if you want to do meats and soups, look for a recipe from the National Center for Home Food Preservation or from Bernardin, who test and make sure that their recipes follow the latest guidelines. So if you have a recipe from your grandma or from an aunt who has passed this on to you, or a good friend, whatever, and you're not sure, then those are recipes that you would freeze, that you would enjoy right away, but I would not recommend that you simply go ahead and can them if you don't know for certain that the procedure is accurate and has the correct acidity level. And there are so many recipes on those two sites, the National Center for Home Food Preservation and Bernardin, that you'll find something to suit your canning needs. Now, there are a lot of high acid foods, so most fruits and jams and pickles, you can do those easily without worrying about Clostridium botulinum.
From our archive, that was a conversation with Getty Stewart. She's a professional home economist and cookbook author. She was speaking there with Faith Lindahl.
I'm Michelle McDougall, your local reporter for CBC Manitoba in Brandon. You're listening to CBC Radio One.
Good morning to you, Brandon. 17 right now, warming up to 27. You also have about a 60% chance or so of thunderstorms this morning. Well, next up here on the show, when Prime Minister Mark Carney addressed the nation on Saturday morning, he said this about walking away from trade negotiations with the U.S.
We cannot accept what they've offered, and we will not give what they've asked.
Now, at this point, there is no indication if or when talks could resume, but the Americans have imposed 50% tariffs on a range of Canadian goods, and the Canadian government says it will pursue retaliatory tariffs after Labor Day. And for his perspective on this developing story, we've reached Rob Russo. He's the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Good morning.
Hello, Corey. How are you?
Good. So what happens now that these tariffs are in place and these trade negotiations have gone south?
You're asking me to predict the whims, the whimsies, the twitches of Donald Trump, and that's difficult for me to do. I can tell you what I'll be watching for. I'll be watching to see whether or not negotiators for both Canada and the United States sheepishly crawl through the window that the Prime Minister's left open by suspending the application of Canada's counter tariffs to 2 weeks from now, September 8th. I think he did that quite deliberately. There's been a small army of public servants that have for months prepared targets. The Prime Minister had the list of those targets in his hand long ago for retaliation. He opted not to strike those targets immediately in order to give people a chance to go back to the table, because it seemed we were very, very close to a deal on Friday in the hours before it unraveled. So let's see if that happens.
And just how close were we? But what do you know about what really made things collapse?
Well, here's what we do know. There's a lot we don't know. But here's what we do know. For days leading up to midnight on Saturday, we'd seen Dominic LeBlanc, the trade minister responsible for these talks, and Janice Charette, who is the lead negotiator, kind of sullenly make their way up the stairs to the landing on 16th Street in Washington, D.C. of the U.S. Trade Representative's office. On Friday, we had an extraordinary sight. Friday afternoon, mere hours before that agreement fell apart, we were treated to the sight of both Dominic LeBlanc and Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, who usually came and went separately, standing on this sun-splashed landing together, jocular, exchanging pleasantries in French, shaking hands, and saying that they'd be talking to each other very, very soon. They look like two men who had what was in effect a handshake deal. We know also from reporting in the Washington Post that there was an extraordinary scene once Jamieson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, went back to brief Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, and Peter Navarro, the pugnacious trade advisor to Donald Trump. Those two men, when they found out what was in the deal, screamed at Jamieson Greer and accused him of giving away the store. So I think we can say that they were close to a deal, and I think we can say that that deal came apart once others in the Trump administration were briefed on it. I think that the time that the Prime Minister has given before the application of these tariffs or counter tariffs might be used by President Trump to try to get his own people in line. I don't go along with those who say Canadian leaders, and by that I mean the premiers, are entirely unified. They're not. But we can say it seems for certain that there's a lack of unity on the U.S. Team as well.
Well, let's come back up here to Canada, and let's talk about that reaction from the premiers, especially in the provinces that'll be hit the hardest by these tariffs. What's the reaction been?
Those who have really been reeling as a result of the Trump tariffs are completely unified. They want the Prime Minister to hit back, and they want him to hit back hard. The lack of the unity is clearly in other provinces that haven't been hit as hard. And I'm talking in particular Alberta and Saskatchewan. They don't want to see an escalating trade war. They think that that puts their goods, their huge exports, in Saskatchewan it's potash, and Alberta it's energy, on the firing line as well. It's going to be hard for the Prime Minister to actually use energy and potash as a weapon, particularly as Albertans prepare to go to the polls in a referendum where they're going to decide whether or not they want to cast a ballot on their future in Canada. That puts the Prime Minister in a bit of a bind. So there isn't actual unity. And I got to tell you, Corey, I cannot remember, as a guy who's knocked around since the first free trade agreement was negotiated in 1989-90, when the Earth's crust was still cooling for many people in Canada. I've never seen premiers who had so much of a role, so much of a say in international trade negotiations. It's extraordinary. It's also an opportunity for Donald Trump to feast on those divisions.
But what does that signal about, the fact that these premiers are taking part more in having more of that say? What does that tell you about where Canada is at, politically?
Yeah, we clearly things have changed. In the first free trade negotiations, I remember Brian Mulroney keeping premiers well informed, well briefed, and well away from the negotiating table. Only one person really was doing the negotiating. That was a fellow named Simon Reisman, who was a pugnacious negotiator, terrific negotiator. Premiers, in many instances, act often as like they have a veto. And premiers in Canada have a great deal of power. We don't have the same federal system as the United States. And as a result, they are elected to represent regional, provincial interests, not the national interest. And that's what's first and foremost in their minds. Again, that opens opportunities for somebody like Donald Trump, who loves to feast on weakness, to pounce.
And even if Canadians are ready to fight these tariffs now, and maybe focus maybe more on buying Canadian, doing their part individually, how much patience do Canadians actually have to withstand the economic effects of this trade war?
We don't know for certain. We haven't really tested the limits of their patience up until now. We do know, just based on the fact that Mark Carney is the Prime Minister, that they are prepared to go to extraordinary lengths, including electing a Liberal for the fourth consecutive time, something that nobody else thought would happen. We see them mobilized and outraged to the point that they will not go and visit their own vacation homes in the southern United States. We see them in the grocery store. I see them picking up lemons and oranges and taking off their glasses and peering at those tiny labels to make sure that they don't come from the United States. If they do, they put them back on the shelves and go elsewhere for their produce. So we haven't tested the limits yet. If it begins to really hammer them at the checkout counter at the grocery store, we might test the limits then. Up until now, woe betide any politician, it seems, who wants to truck or trade with Donald Trump.
Well, Rob, thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Corey.
Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent with The Economist. Time now for your CBC News from Manitoba.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 6:30, it is 17 degrees. Good chance of showers this morning and again this evening, and sandwiched in between is a mix of sun and clouds today with a high of 26. Canadians are entering a new work week under a new trade war. Over the weekend, fresh 50% U.S. tariffs kicked in on $28 billion worth of Canadian exports. Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will respond dollar for dollar after Labor Day. He is also expected to announce new supports for Canadian businesses hit hard by the trade dispute. We'll hear more coming up on World Report at 7. Now, a Winnipeg business owner says he feels like collateral damage as Canada prepares to implement counter tariffs. Derek Hurd at Evolution Wheel says the company has to import U.S. steel because there isn't supply for the type of steel he uses in Canada. He says the recent escalation has him considering moving the business across the border.
We're collateral or friendly fire, whichever you want to look at it. It's easy to call it a trade war, but again, our experience isn't that we're in a war, it's that we're dealing with friendly fire.
Canada's retaliatory tariffs come into effect on September 8th. The head of the Manitoba Beekeepers Association says a lot of producers have lost a major market for their honey.
To be honest, I woke up and heard the news and just that pit in the stomach formed.
That is the association's chairperson, Ian Stepler. He says this is a bad time for 50% tariffs. Producers are right in the middle of the honey harvest. Stepler says a significant amount of honey is sold south of the border. He says the U.S. accounts for around half of Manitoba's honey exports. The province's U.S. Trade Council meets this afternoon to talk about this trade war. The council was created last year in response to President Trump's tariffs. Members come from a range of industries, sectors, and labor groups in Manitoba. Bram Strain at the Business Council of Manitoba is one of the members.
We're going to discuss a lot of direct impacts to specific businesses and what these new tariffs mean. And then, of course, what corresponding programming or supports may be necessary to weather the storm.
Strain says it's going to take time to figure out a path forward because diversifying to new markets doesn't happen quickly. You can hear the latest on this story throughout the morning right here on Information Radio. A Montreal-based lawyer was shocked to learn she had been flagged as a public safety concern by a Winnipeg bar. Alexandra went to the Riverside Bar in St. Vital in June, and after a couple of drinks, she felt sick and ran to the closest washroom. Now, CBC is only identifying her by first name because she fears professional repercussions by telling her story. They asked her to leave, which she did without incident. She was then denied entry a month later at a venue at the Calgary Stampede because there was a public flag under her name made by the Riverside.
I quite quickly realized that this was data sharing, because how would a flag from a bar in Winnipeg show up at this venue in Alberta?
Riverside management tells CBC the flag should have been made internal, not public. They removed it and trained staff on the policy around using these flags. Marking 35 years of independence in wartime, many Ukrainians gathered in West St. Paul yesterday at a cultural event organized by the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. 4 years on, Ruslan Zelnik, representing a humanitarian organization supporting Ukrainians, hopes people aren't forgetting about the war in Ukraine.
It's sad to hear that sometimes the people are saying, you know what, actually, we don't know that Ukraine already won or the war is stopped. No, it's not. And it's a full scale of war is going back to Ukraine.
Zelnick says the event not only raised money for those affected by the ongoing war, but was also a celebration for the lives lost since Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. The Royal Canadian Air Force is retiring 12 Hercules aircraft after decades of service. Major Tom Dolman has flown those planes for years. He says the fleet is like the jack of all trades in military aviation, capable of assisting military deployments. But the Hercules has also been used most recently during search operations and wildfire evacuations in Manitoba.
Definitely a little bit sentimental to see the aircraft go, but change is inevitable as well. We're looking forward to bringing in our new CC-295 Kingfisher and bringing forward all the capabilities of that aircraft.
A Hercules was on display in Winnipeg through the weekend. More than 100 people climbed aboard the main cabin and cockpit to see it one last time before it joins a museum display. You can find the latest news updated throughout your day. All you have to do is head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
One of the most favorite stories I ever told involved a Hercules airplane.
Really?
It was essentially the story was it was wild. I called up this guy and he told me the story. He was having a barbecue on the beach. A Hercules on Lake Manitoba near Lundar. A Hercules plane flies by, drops a parachute, and it's got a walkie-talkie at the end of it.
The parachute just had a walkie-talkie.
Yeah, so a neighbor of his picks it up, brings it over to him, and he checks it out, and it's the military / RCMP on the other side saying, "Hey, do you have a Sea-Doo? We need your help. There's someone trapped in the middle of Lake Manitoba on a boat. Can you go out there? We'll fly the Hercules around. You just follow the Hercules plane. It'll be dropping flares." And then you go and tie your Sea-Doo to him and pull him back to shore. And it was not a wild story.
That's incredible. And he did it, right?
He did it. He sure did. He went out there. It was like a few kilometers out. He had to go out there, but there was the Hercules that helped guide him there and dropped a walkie-talkie from a parachute. Isn't that cool?
Isn't that funny? Because you normally think of Hercules like carrying really big, heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But this is a walkie-talkie.
It was dropping a walkie-talkie. He sent a video and everything of this Hercules just like dropping a walkie-talkie.
That's a great story.
Pretty wild. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That's Heather Wells at your CBC News Desk. Well, out there right now, it's 17 here in Winnipeg. Let's get your regional forecast. We are warming up to 26 today, but between, as you heard Heather mention there, this morning there is still a chance of thunderstorms, about a 60% chance or so, according to Environment Canada. And then we're going to have a bit of a cloudy day throughout the day, and then by the evening, late evening, another chance of thunderstorms and rain but then warming up again to 22 tomorrow, and then also some thunderstorms and chance tomorrow. So a couple rainy-ish days ahead of us here. Very similar story out in Brandon as well. 17 right now, warming up to 27. You're going to get there's about a 60% chance of thunderstorms this morning, and then also, but it is going to be clearing more throughout the day and not a big chance at all. Actually, zero chance that we see right now of a thunderstorm late into the evening, but a chance of thunderstorms tomorrow for Brandon. Steinbach right now, you're 17, also a chance of thunderstorms this morning. Pretty much a carbon copy forecast actually of Winnipeg. You might see some thunderstorms later tonight and into tomorrow as well. And Thompson right now, you're at 16, warming up to 24. You also have a 30% chance of showers or thunderstorms that will go through this morning and then continue also into the evening as well and into tomorrow. Your high tomorrow is 23. Well, let's check in now with Sierra Sanders, who's in with a look at not news headlines, but look at the commute. Hi.
I mean, I wish I had some commute headlines for you, but unfortunately I don't. But I mean, I think it's good news because to me it sounds like things are moving along pretty smoothly out here as the week gets kicked off today. But if that does change, I would love to hear from you, no matter how you were getting around this morning. And no matter where you are in the province, you can give me a call on that CBC commuter line. That number is 204-788-3093.
Yes, enjoy that slow commute before September comes back in full force, and I'm sure we'll be getting a lot more calls on that commuter line. Well, up next here on Information Radio, time for your business report with Neil Herland. Good morning.
Good morning, Corey.
So over the weekend, of course, we saw a political reaction to Canada walking away from tariff negotiations with the U.S., but this morning we're getting the market reaction. So what have we seen so far? What's still to come?
Yeah, so currency trading began Sunday afternoon, and the Canadian dollar dipped only slightly against the American dollar from Friday's price. The loonie is now at 72.2 cents US. The loonie also fell against the euro and the yen. But the bulk of the currency trading is still to come today, and the biggest thing we're watching is the start of the stock market trading in North America. The major exchanges open at 9:30 Eastern this morning, and analysts expect certain stocks could suffer more than others. For example, companies that are heavily involved in cross-border trade, such as the automotive, steel, and agricultural sectors. Manufacturing is another area that's bracing for market reaction. Some products are on the U.S. tariff list, while others are not, and the initial shock could hit those companies that import and export between Canada and the U.S. But trade uncertainty could also lead to a broader sell-off as investors worry about supply chain disruptions, rising costs, and a slowdown across the economy.
General Motors Canada and its main union reached a tentative deal over the weekend, but what impact did the tariff war have on those talks?
Well, the tariff situation was definitely a high-pressure backdrop during the negotiations between GM and Unifor. But the tentative agreements reached this weekend are designed to match the contract that was already ratified with Ford Canada last month. The new tentative agreements with GM Canada cover more than 4,600 workers across Ontario at the Oshawa Assembly Plant, the Kami Assembly Plant in Ingersoll, the St. Catharines Propulsion Plant, and the Woodstock Parts Distribution Centre. The union bargaining chair said in a statement over the weekend, "We entered this round of talks in the midst of tariff uncertainty and relentless U.S. trade aggression." Now, details of the tentative agreements will only be released to union members at ratification meetings, which are scheduled for this coming Saturday and Sunday. Then the new GM contract will go to a vote. The union is recommending ratification, and with this climate of tariffs, it will likely be approved.
And finally here, let's pivot. Let's talk a little bit more about FIFA. So the World Cup obviously came to Canada this summer with the promise of big economic and tourism benefits. But an early assessment is raising questions about the payoff. So what happened?
Well, Canada spent more than $1 billion on the soccer tournament. That money went into infrastructure and security spending for the 13 soccer matches that were held in Toronto and Vancouver. About $500 million came from the feds and half came from provincial and municipal governments. The Canadian government was counting on 1 million foreign tourists coming here specifically for the World Cup. But that massive number of tourists was based on how many people visited Qatar when that Middle Eastern country hosted the 2022 World Cup. And of course, the tournament was held entirely in one country. This year, the World Cup was shared and split 3 ways by Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. But the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the finals, they were all played in the U.S. So how many more tourists flew into Canada during the World Cup period this year compared to last year? Just 27,000 people. Another measure is how many visitors to Canada wrote that they were coming here for the World Cup in their visitor visa form. The answer is only 26,000 people. Now, not all visitors had to put FIFA in their form, although the Canadian government encouraged them to do so. And I should mention the official financial assessment of how the FIFA World Cup in Canada performed is only being released next year. The cities of Vancouver and Toronto declined to comment on the impact of the World Cup when our colleagues at Radio-Canada contacted them.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Neil.
You're welcome, Corey.
That is Neil Herland with your business news. Let's get some more reaction now to that failed trade deal. U.S. President Donald Trump's latest tariffs will affect Canadians coast to coast to coast, and Cross Country Checkup was on the air gathering thoughts from across the country, just a day after the Canadian government decided to step away from trade talks with the United States. The question was, what's your reaction to trade talks between Canada and the U.S. falling apart, and how are you affected? Here's what some callers shared with host Ian Hannah-Mansing.
Well, I have a unique perspective because I'm a little bit younger. I'm 24 years old. Especially with young people, when we hear trade war, we kind of start thinking about our future. Are we going to be able to get jobs if businesses can't pay payroll? Are we going to be able to afford housing? Are we going to be able to start a family? And it's not so much that our pockets are really dry and we're having a hard time. It's more so that we have so much anxiety around what's going on that we start to save our money and hold our money a little bit more closer.
I think Carney's way out of his league. He's not forthcoming with anything. I mean, I listened to all his gung-ho talks, but all he is talk. He couldn't do the walk. He did the talk. You look at the Gordie Howe Bridge. He was never forthcoming with information there. We lost out there. Even with the negotiating now, he's not forthcoming with what went wrong.
I really think that before September 8th, it would be nice to have some transparency about the deal that was rejected. And without really knowing what was offered and why it was rejected, we can't meaningfully compare that option with the economic consequences of the current 50% tariff environment. And I really think that either way it's going to cost Canadians. Business support programs will ultimately involve public money, but additional tariffs will also cost Canadians. And together, those pressures are going to reduce the purchasing power and further weaken the business and the economy.
Trump has been saying for a long time that we need nothing from Canada. And I think he convinces himself of his own rhetoric. And, we've seen so many irrational statements made about taking over Greenland and other countries, and that it's very difficult when you're dealing with somebody that thinks they don't need their most valuable trading partner that has an integrated economy, the best neighbor they will ever have.
Those are callers on Cross Country Checkup yesterday responding to the question, what's your reaction to trade talks between Canada and the U.S. falling apart, and how are you affected? And if you have an answer to that question and you're listening, we would love to hear from you too. You can give us a call on our local listener line. We're still trying to make sense of what these tariffs will mean for Manitobans. Let us know. That number to call, 204-788-3205. That's 204-788-3205. Whether you're directly affected or you have some thoughts on what took place over the weekend and what's happening right now with these tariffs, 204-788-3205. Well, time now for a bit of music. Franco-Manitoban artist Flora Luna and Alpha Toshunitsa turned up recently for this next track. They teamed up recently for this next track. And in English, the title means easy like water. This is Facile comme de l'eau.
Vas-y, plonge un peu, on jouera avec le feu et tu crieras tout haut que c'est facile comme de l'eau. Vas-y, fonce un peu, rentre dans mon jeu où tu rides la wave, où tu te laisses tomber.
Avec les fleurs du mal, en trêve et son mal, y a pas de trêve dans leur élan nuptial. Plus jamais esselés, de volupté, ils se sont saoulés, envolés dans les nuits arrosées, contourés comme la rosée, noyés dans un verre dosé.
Inspire, désir, expire, plaisir d'amour, je veux tout.
That was Franco-Manitoban artist Flora Luna and Alpha Toshenitsa with Facile comme de l'eau.
You know the voices that tell the story of our province. Now you can take them anywhere. From the essential start to your day on information radio to the conversations that define our lunch hour on Radio Noon and the pulse of the city on Up to Speed, your local connection is always within reach. Just open the CBC News app, tap the local drop-down, and hit play. Your favorite voices, your province, right in your pocket. Download the CBC News app today, your daily rhythm, live and local.
Well, up next here on Information Radio, a whole lot of history has unfolded over the course of Ethel Ketterham's life. From 2 world wars to the sinking of the Titanic and COVID-19 pandemic, the British woman recently celebrated a milestone birthday, turning 117 years old. Essentially, at that age, every year is a milestone birthday. She's the oldest verifiable living person on Earth. And it may have you asking why some people are able to live so long. Well, for her insights, we've reached Stephanie Hatzifilolithis. She's a scientist at the Women's Age Lab at Women's College Hospital in Toronto. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I feel like as a journalist, I've done these stories where we have like someone who's lived very, very long. You talk to them, the classic question, what's your secret? Then suddenly, like often they'll be like, oh, I just only have like 2-3 cigarettes a day and a couple glasses of wine. And you gotta be, and you're kind of like, no way. So I just got to ask, like, how much of our lifespan is actually determined by, genetics versus actual, lifestyle choices?
It matters quite a bit. And I think that's often the narrative that we hear, right? There's a lot of research on twin studies that do suggest that, genetics may account for roughly, anywhere between 15 to about 45% of our longevity, which is quite a lot more than we previously thought. But to say, there is a lot of individual variation, right? So longevity is a big story, and some of the chapters are biology, some of the chapters are environment, some are behavior, and to be frank, luck. But I think the question too is oftentimes, one, the distinguishing between life expectancy and lifespan. So, life expectancy is really that average number of years we can expect to live based on those population level patterns. But lifespan is that biological limit, right? So it's that, human can potentially live generally, which is estimated to be around 120 and 125. So Ethel is just about pushing that upper limit there. And so our life expectancy, even in Canada currently, is around 82 years of age. But all to say, we're really interested in kind of thinking about that health span. So not just, having those extra candles on your birthday cake, right? But also like, can you actually enjoy the cake too?
And what are some of the other social, economic, environmental factors that contribute to how long people live?
I think, it's the usual suspects, right? So we think about income, we think about education, we think about our life course. It's not just, how we live at the age of 65, it's how we've lived across our whole life, which played a crucial role. My research in particular, I'm very interested in that social side of longevity. I'm really interested in how, what does housing look like? How do our communities shape our longevity? What are the inequalities or equalities that, relate to longevity, and how do some people age really well and some people don't? In particular, I'm really interested in older women. I work in the Women's Age Lab at Women's College Hospital. So we're really interested in that key question, right? So what does it mean to age well? And how what are those biological and social environmental factors that kind of work together across the life course?
Mm-hmm. So there's people who age well, they live maybe a little bit past the average lifespan that we know. But then there's a term of people, a whole category of folks called super agers. Who are super agers?
Yeah, it's a really cool term that's been used, and researchers really define it as someone who's not just living, to a very old age, but generally talking about someone who maintains this, what they would say, like an unusually strong cognitive or physical function well into older age. So you described Ethel in the beginning, right? So someone who's, let's say, well over 100, still meeting with the king, versus someone who's a bit younger who may be already struggling with everyday activities, let's say, preparing a meal or taking a shower. And, maybe for a lot of us, 117 may not be the retirement goal. But like I said before, I think it's an important distinction that we have, that most people really want to add those life and that quality of life to our years versus than just adding those years at the end.
So then what are the common factors in super agers that may explain their living to advanced ages?
It's remarkably unsexy, right? So it's a frustrating answer because I think people want to sell, like you said before, that one secret, that one supplement, that one superfood. People seem to think that, they can kale their way out of genetics to a certain degree. But, the evidence I think is boring, but in a way that's helpful. Because we've learned a lot about longevity through blue zones, which are really areas across the world where we see really an unusually big and large amount of people who live long, healthy lives. So researchers naturally have been gravitated towards these areas to try to understand what it is. And it really boils down to a few things. And mostly people move naturally, eat mostly whole foods, they don't smoke, they drink moderately, if at all, they have purpose, they manage stress. But, I think one of the biggest lessons I would say to take from the blue zones isn't that we should all just start, eating exactly what someone in Ikaria, Greece is eating. It's that, longevity is almost embedded in the way we live. And, longevity is less about those individual hacks and more about the way we live. And so, I often say the healthiest behavior is often the behavior you don't have to think very hard about. Right? So if people walk everywhere because their community is walkable, that's very different than telling someone to go to the gym and exercise more. If people regularly eat with other people, they're socially engaged, they're embedded in their local community, that's very different than telling someone to be less lonely.
And finally here, I know, like you said, there's not that magic bullet, there's not that one life hack, but we're not all going to live to be 117, but if you had one bit of advice for listeners about one thing they could do today to live longer and healthier, what would that be?
I would say don't take advantage of the relationships and the people in your life. Relationships aren't just nice to have. They have really strong associations with cognitive and health outcomes. There's a few longitudinal research studies that have been done that have really strong associations between social connections and lower risks of cognitive impairment, dementia, and mortality. And it's not just about those, let's say Instagram friends or 500 Facebook friends. It's about meaningful, reciprocal, people who notice when you're not there kind of friends. So my advice would be say hi to your neighbor, and it's probably a lot cheaper than a longevity supplement.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Stephanie Hatziphilithis, she's a scientist at the Women's Age Lab at Women's College Hospital and an assistant professor at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. Well, still ahead here on Information Radio, we're going to keep talking about the impacts of those new U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods after those failed trade talks. We're going to hear from a third-generation family business who is afraid that it might actually have to shut down because of these tariffs. He's a honey farmer. We're going to hear from him coming up after 7 o'clock. But right now, though, let's check in with Heather Wells, who's in with a look at news headlines. Hello.
Good morning. Well, a woman is raising questions about ID scanners and privacy after she was flagged by a Winnipeg bar as a nationwide public safety concern. It happened during an incident at Riverside Bar in June. After a couple of drinks, Alexandra, we're just using her first name, felt sick, ran to the washroom, and the next month at a venue at the Calgary Stampede, where her ID was scanned, she was denied entry. The Winnipeg bar had created a public flag across the country for other bars using that same scanner platform. So we're going to hear more about this story coming from our I-team in our next local news coming up at 7:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That's Heather Wells at your CBC News Desk. Also coming up this next hour on the show, the Canadian military is retiring a fleet of 12 Hercules aircrafts. So we are going to speak to a veteran. We're going to hear from a veteran who has lots of experience on one of those Hercules aircrafts to talk about what that plane means to him. But also right now, keep an eye on your commute. Very quiet overall. If you do see something going on, you can give us a call on the CBC commuter line. That number 204-788-3093. And for your weather right now, we're sitting at 17. We are looking for a high today of 26 here in Winnipeg with about a 6% chance of thunderstorms this morning. I'm Corey Funk in for Marcy Marcusa. We'll be back after World Report. Stay tuned.
The Current with Matt Galloway. Nothing is off limits.
Why would that be appropriate? It's incredibly powerful. I can't imagine what it's like for them.
Have you ever seen anything like this before? The scale of these lockdowns?
How can a music and a culture fight the power? Are you suggesting that the headlines and the stories behind the headlines aren't true?
The Current with Matt Galloway. Weekday mornings at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland. And on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Martina Fitzgerald. Canadians are entering a new work week under a new trade war. Over the weekend, fresh 50% U.S. tariffs kicked in on $28 billion worth of Canadian exports. Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will respond dollar for dollar after Labor Day. He's also expected to announce new supports for the Canadian businesses hit hard by the dispute. The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian joins us from Ottawa. Rafi, there are no further meetings scheduled between the Canadian and U.S. trade negotiators. Where do things stand this morning?
Martina, we know there is still some level of contact between U.S.-Canada Trade Relations Minister Dominic LeBlanc and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, but it is striking to me that the Prime Minister said quite openly there are no current plans to get back to the negotiating table. Simultaneously, he did not enact these counter tariffs right away. This 2-week window is almost a stick that could turn into an olive branch if the Americans decide they do want to talk after all. As for when Canadians might get a sense of how local businesses here will be supported, there's certainly a sense of urgency. Here's Lisa Raitt, who's a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on U.S.-Canada relations and a former Conservative cabinet minister herself.
He really can't stall on that. Whoever is devising and developing these programs better have them ready to go Monday morning, because I can tell you where I work, clients are already calling and asking, what are we going to do?
We are expecting to hear from Prime Minister Carney later today.
As you know, Rafi, there's also pressure from the opposition for more transparency from Ottawa regarding this deal that was rejected. What can you tell us about that?
So Carney did share some details. He alluded to the U.S. refusing to exempt heavy-duty trucks from auto tariffs or going after Canadian protections on language and culture, for example. But that's not enough for the opposition Conservatives. Their U.S.-Canada relations critic Shuv Majumdar says releasing the full text of the agreement would reassure the country that walking away was the right choice.
It's incumbent on the Prime Minister to build that trust with the public and with the opposition by releasing the full text of what had been negotiated. We're not asking for secret aspects of the deal or negotiation tactics. That's not something that we want to undermine the government or Canada with. But the Canadian public deserves to know exactly what the deal was, so they should release the deal.
The Conservatives are also calling for Parliament to reconvene immediately to discuss both the agreement and what supports might look like, Martina.
The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian in Ottawa. Thank you, Rafi.
You're welcome.
As we mentioned, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has said there are no plans for new talks with Canada. The possibility of a prolonged trade war is stoking unease about economic effects on both sides of the border.
Well, Canada is an important trading partner for America.
Neil Kashkari heads the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis in the northern state of Minnesota. He told CBS News the U.S. has seen 5 years of elevated inflation because of supply shocks.
One of those supply shocks is the trade and tariff conflicts. And so to the extent that we can get to a new normal, a level of whatever the trade dynamic is going to be, once we can get to that steady state, then businesses can adjust and the inflationary impact can fade into the background.
The new tariffs are expected to drive up prices for U.S. consumers ahead of the coming midterm elections. Affordability is expected to be a key issue. The diplomatic friction between Ottawa and Washington was on full display with the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Now, new documents obtained by CBC News show the American owner of a competing key route met with senior Canadian officials prior to the bridge's opening. Colin Butler has this exclusive report.
I don't know that there is a comparable.
Lori Troutman studies the Canada-U.S. border at Western Washington University. She's talking about Windsor-Detroit, where the privately owned Ambassador Bridge now sits beside the publicly owned Gordie Howe Bridge.
It creates a whole different layer, I think, of diplomacy. It's not necessarily about better accessibility or more efficiency for trade flows. It's about profit.
CBC News has learned that as the Gordie Howe prepared to open, senior Canadian government officials met privately in April with the ambassador's American owner Matthew Maroon at his request. The details contained in briefing notes obtained by CBC through the Access to Information Act. But much of what was discussed remains blacked out. Maroon didn't respond to a request for comment. What we do know is 11 days after the meeting, the Ambassador Bridge lowered its tolls below the rates of Gordie Howe.
It's not surprising.
That's University of Windsor political science professor John Sutcliffe. The Maroon family fought for decades to protect its lucrative Ambassador Bridge monopoly. They couldn't stop the Gordie Howe.
I mean, you have a classic case of a moving from a monopoly situation to one where there's competition and therefore prices come down.
Ottawa says the meeting was routine. The circumstances, though, were anything but. A billionaire, a new competitor, a bridge caught in a fight with the White House. Ottawa listened, but what Maroon wanted them to hear remains secret. Colin Butler, CBC News, London, Ontario.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky lays wreaths at the Wall of Remembrance in Kyiv. This is Ukraine's Independence Day. The UK's Prime Minister is among the world leaders attending the events. He will also chair a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. Willie Lowry has more.
Good morning, Prime Minister. UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham arrived in Ukraine this morning to help the country mark its 35th Independence Day. It's Burnham's first international trip since taking office last month, and it comes as Kyiv faces yet another test from Russia. On Friday, at least 16 people were killed in a Russian strike on a shopping mall in Kryvyi Rih, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown. Burnham is expected to provide Ukraine with critical information that will allow the country to develop its own long-range ballistic missile capabilities. Here's UK Defence Minister Luke Pollard.
By releasing the UK technology within that enables Ukraine to develop their own capabilities, which creates the added deterrence against this.
Volodymyr Arilov, Ukraine's former Deputy Minister of Defense, says the new technology could be instrumental in Kyiv's ability to hit deeper into Russia.
It would be a kind of game changer when the first Ukrainian ballistic missile will reach some kind of targets close to Moscow, with all this information coming inside the Russian society to understand that something different is going on in this war.
While in Kyiv, Burnham will chair a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, a group of dozens of countries who have pledged to support Ukraine against Russia's war of aggression. Canada is a key member of that coalition. Willie Lowry, CBC News, London.
WestJet flight attendants are wrapping up a week-long vote on a new tentative contract. The Canadian Union of Public Employees says the agreement includes more than 18% in wage increases over 3 years and compensation for work performed on the ground. More than 4,400 cabin crew workers went on strike earlier this month. Although the disruption lasted only 1 day, it led to the cancellation and delay of hundreds of WestJet flights. After years of decline, there are signs Yukon's Chinook salmon stocks are on the rebound. Researchers say numbers are at their highest since 2019, but they warn a full comeback may still be an upstream battle. Alexa Mackay has that story.
A dozen kids watch a Chinook salmon at the Whitehorse Fish Ladder. Its migration spans more than 3,000 kilometers from the Bering Sea to the Yukon. Manager Liam Milford says the ladder eases their journey.
To climb the ladder, they will either jump over those walls or swim through small holes in the bottom. It looks like our numbers are starting to climb.
This summer, ladder staff recorded more than 560 salmon so far. The population is on track for its highest return in years. Kwanlin Dun First Nation Chief Sean Smith says this is exciting for Indigenous communities.
Feeding our families, especially during those cold winter months, and the high rich oils and foods and minerals and vitamins that's found within salmon, has helped sustain families for thousands of years.
Scott Hinch is a fisheries conservation professor at the University of British Columbia. He cautions against celebrating the returns amid the general decline in salmon numbers. He says warming oceans are to blame for changes to marine life.
ones that prefer warmer water are actually doing better and migrating further north. And certainly a species changes in predator-prey is happening in the oceans as we warm.
Along the Yukon River, a 7-year ban on fishing for Chinook has been in place since 2024. But Hinch says the fish may never return to their historic numbers. Alexa Mackay, CBC News, Whitehorse.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm Martina Fitzgerald. This is CBC News.
Well, good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio One, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on the CBC Manitoba YouTube page. I'm Corey Funk, in for Marcy Marcusa. Well, coming up this hour on the show, a Manitoba honey farmer is worried about his third-generation family business after the U.S. slapped 50% tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Canadian goods, and that includes natural honey.
The U.S. has historically been our largest customer. There is virtually zero profit margin right now. It's non-viable for us to ship to our usual customers that buy honey from us.
That's Ozzy Podolsky, the general manager at Podolsky Honey Farms. We're going to speak with him coming up. Also, have you ever wondered what can happen when to your information when you get your ID scanned at a bar or a club here in Winnipeg? Well, one woman found out after she was labeled a public safety concern and denied entry a month later at a bar in Calgary. Believe it or not. The I-Team's Kristen Annabelle will be here to talk about what happened and why privacy experts are raising concerns. Stay tuned for that and much, much more. But right now, at 7:11, let's check in with Heather Wells with a look at news headlines.
Good morning. Well, Manitoba's U.S. Trade Council meets later this afternoon to talk about the trade war with the U.S. and those 50% tariffs that have now kicked in. Members of the council come from a range of industries, sectors, and labor groups. Bram Strain at the Business Council of Manitoba says they're going to discuss impacts to specific businesses and supports to help them weather the storm. One Winnipeg business owner says he feels like collateral damage. Derek Hurd at Evolution Wheel says his company has to import U.S. steel because there isn't supply for the type of steel he uses in Canada. He says the recent escalation with this trade war has him considering moving the business across the border. I'll be back with more Manitoba news at 7:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thanks.
That's Heather Wells at your CBC News desk. Let's take a quick look at your weather here in Winnipeg. A wet morning so far here in Winnipeg. Roads are looking slick and a bit of rain coming down. There is still about a 60% chance of thunderstorms this morning as well. 16 right now. We're heading for a high today of 26. It's going to be a bit cloudy for the rest of the day once this system kind of moves through. And then you can expect another chance of thunderstorms later tonight. It's going to dip down to 16 with about a 70% chance of thunderstorms later in the evening. Well, let's check in now with Sierra Sanders, who is in now with a look at your commute. Hello.
Hi, Corey. I'm still been pretty quiet on the CBC commuter line this morning, not hearing about any major incidents or backups. So it sounds like your commute, according to the actual commuters out there, is looking pretty good and moving along pretty smoothly. But there is just a traffic alert that I want to let folks know about. Westbound Pandora Avenue West, there's a closure there. So all westbound lanes of Pandora Avenue West between J Street to Plessis Road will be closed for street construction until August 28th. So that starts today and runs until August 28th. So all westbound lanes will be open for the morning rush hours, but you want to expect delays there. So you should be able to move through there this morning, but going forward, there will be some closures there due to that construction work. So westbound Pandora Avenue between Day Street to Plessis Road will be closed for street construction until August 28th. So far, that's really the only thing I wanted to let folks know about it. But if there's something that you're seeing out there and you want to let me know about it, I'd love to hear from you no matter how you're getting around and no matter where you are here in Manitoba. Give me a call. That number's 204-788-3093.
Well, 7:14 right now, and next up here on Information Radio, businesses in Manitoba are bracing for the potential fallout after trade talks between Canada and the U.S. broke down at the 11th hour on Friday night. The U.S. slapped 50% tariffs on $28 billion worth of Canadian goods, which includes natural honey. Ossie Podolsky is a third-generation farmer from Ethelbert, Manitoba, and he's the general manager at Podolsky Honey Farms, and he joins us now to talk about it. Good morning.
Hey, how are you this morning, Corey?
Good, good. Well, thanks for joining us here. Curious how you're doing. How's the latest rounds of tariffs going to impact your business?
At this point, we're trying to make a plan on how to continue. We don't know if this is going to be short term or something that's going to stick around for the long term. In the short term, we probably could weather the storm and get through this without too much trouble. But if this continues on going into next season or next crop season, it's going to flip things upside down for us.
Just give us a sense of the impact here. How big is your customer base in the U.S.?
Typically, we'll ship anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million pounds of honey. So it's multiple truckloads a season.
Mm-hmm. And what percentage of your overall business goes to the U.S.?
Typically around 90% goes to the U.S. So
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And what does that now mean for profit margins? Sending that to the U.S., what does a sale of honey with that 50% tariff on it mean for you, for the bottom line?
We're unable to sell honey in the U.S. We would be losing money essentially with that kind of a tariff. Essentially any tariff. The profit margins in honey are extremely thin.
So then what are you doing in the short term now? Are you just halting shipments to the U.S.? Because I guess technically right now, if you ship something, there would be that 50% tariff, right? So what are you doing to pivot?
Correct. We tried to ship as much honey that we had barreled already to our customers and said, hey, this is what we're expecting. We may not be able to ship in October, November, December when we usually do. So we shipped as much as we could for some cash flow. We have a few Canadian contracts to fill, and then it'll probably be to sit on some crop and wait, see what happens with the market and trade and all the uncertainty.
I guess the nice part is that honey's famous for being able to sit for a long time, but you still have to sell just to make ends meet, I'm guessing. So what are you thinking long term is the answer if these tariffs do stay on for, 3, 4, 5, 6 months?
There is no easy answer. We are an exporting country. So Canada typically produces a third more honey than we consume. The best solution is just to have the general public consume more honey. That would help use up a lot of that surplus and prevent us from having an oversupply, which would lead to a crash in the price. So I always suggest to people, switch to honey in your coffee.
Oh, and what are you hearing from your customers in the U.S. when you tell them, hey, I can't ship you honey? It just doesn't make business sense.
It's difficult for them too because they have agreements or contracts to sell specific blends to their retailers. And if they're not able to get the honey for those blends, they may have to switch. And then it can be really hard for them to regain what they originally would have been shipping, which would be including Canadian honey in their blends.
I don't mean to be blunt, but is there a risk of having to shut down if this goes on for too long?
Absolutely. If you can't find a market and you can't make money at what you're doing, at the end of the day, you have to turn a profit to keep everything rolling.
So, you personally, this is your, third generation honey farmer. What's going through your mind right now as you even see that as a possibility?
I don't even know what else I would do. This was my life. This is all I grew up from a kid. I live and breathe beekeeping. That's all I talk about.
And this isn't the first time we've faced, very volatile trade situation here. In a best case scenario, things go back, there's a trade deal struck, tariffs go away. Does this still make you think about, hey, how am I going to pivot going forward? And, if all of a sudden now Trump thinks to, threaten another 50% tariff in a year or so, right? How are you processing all this, and how hard is this just to plan?
Oh, it's extremely difficult. We have been fortunate in beginning to diversify some of our business, and maybe we'll try and pivot into other aspects of beekeeping and generating revenue with bees. But for the most part, we are set up to be a commercial honey producer that supplies honey in bulk for packaging plants.
And what are you hearing from other honey producers in Manitoba and elsewhere too? Are they in similar situations?
Oh, absolutely. There is a lot of distraught. A lot of beekeepers don't know what the future is going to bring. The unfortunate thing is some operations were not able to ship any honey to the regular customers because their crop was late and they didn't have any extracted and put in barrels yet. So they're in a more difficult situation maybe, but There are other countries that we could sell to. Japan has been the next biggest buyer. There have been some issues in recent years in trying to get honey to Japan, but maybe that market will open up a little bit more, or maybe some other countries in the UK or something. We're not sure yet, but we'll see.
And as you look forward to try to get to other markets, or is there any other ways that the governments, whether provincial, federal, could help to make things easier for you to do business?
Really, it's just trying to make sure that we have the avenues that we need to get the correct inspections or permits or protocols. Sometimes there can be issues with Canadian regulations versus overseas regulations that can prohibit the sale of honey, kind of due to a little bit of just paperwork red tape that could be changed. So that's one avenue that could make it easier.
And, in the 3 generations you've been doing this for, have you ever faced these kind of economic headwinds? Has it been like an existential issue like this, or is this the worst it's been?
This is the most out of our control factor I say we've ever had. There always is a chance you can have a poor crop, you could have low prices, you could have overwinter losses, but this is something entirely outside of the industry that is directly negatively affecting it.
Well, Aussie, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your time, and all the best as you navigate this tough situation.
All right, thank you.
Aussie Podolsky is the general manager at Podolsky Honey Farms in Ethelbert, Manitoba. And for more on the story, you can go to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
My name is Kevin Mallon. We opened up an office and shop space and live and work in the West End every day. The best part about the West End is for sure the community. I get such a warm feeling driving down the streets with the trees hanging over the streets so nicely. There's kids everywhere. I help by shoveling my neighbor's walkway. They help by making delicious Indian food for me. It's a great community. Love living there.
People, places, and stories. CBC Radio One, 89.3 FM.
Well, if you're listening on Friday, you may have heard an interview about the arborist, the tree climbing competition happening in Kildonan Park. Well, out of that, we couldn't help but ask listeners, what's your favorite tree in Manitoba? And it was for a chance to win a specially designed Nalgene water bottle. It's got someone climbing up a tree on it. It's kind of a fun water bottle. And here's some of the calls we got.
I'm Tim Craker. My favorite tree is a white pine, a windswept white pine on a little island in West Hawk Lake, and just classic boreal Manitoba or Canadian shield. It's inspiring.
Hi, my name is Bob Bruce. My favorite tree is a red pine that's on Fiddler Avenue in St. James. It's a beautiful tree, and it's near my friend's house. And I just love going down there and seeing that tree when I drive down there.
Morning, Des LeBeau. I have a tree out in my corral for my cows, and it's probably about, you can't get your arms around it anyway. My cows use it for back scratch. There's basically no bark on that part of the tree. They rub underneath it, and there's gnarly little bumps on it, so it makes a good back scratch. And it's still green as grass on the main beam, but you can see through it. It's hilarious. My gnarly old tree in the backyard.
Love that. Those are some of what listeners had to say about their favorite tree in Manitoba. And if you still want to call us and you have a favorite tree that comes to mind for you, you can give us a call. Maybe fit it on today's show or tomorrow. 204-788-3205. That's 204-788-3205. Well, from those calls, we chose at random. And congrats to Deb, who has that gnarly old back scratching tree. You win the water bottle. We're going to ship that out your way. Well, it is hard to know which tree is Winnipeg singer-songwriter Madeline Rogers' favorite. She sings about a whole bunch of them in this next song here. Here she is with Cottonwood on CBC Radio One.
You are the cottonwood tree, started off small at the edge of a century, through your veins down into the earth, fed on water and sun. Your flowers will bloom 'neath the crescent moon.
That's Madeline Roger with Cottonwood. Well, 7:25 right now. Time to check in with Scott Roger with a look at your morning sports. Hello.
Hey, Corey.
So let's start with baseball, where there's good news and bad news for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, the bad news, Corey, is that they lost to the Yankees yesterday and thus lost more ground in their fight for a playoff spot. Toronto's now 1.5 games out. The good news, though, says manager John Schneider, is they did go 5-4 against the Yankees and the Rays, the two teams ahead of them in the AL East.
A 500 road trip against the division teams that are at the top, you want to say that's good, but we need to be a little bit better in certain situations. But big picture, yeah, you get through this stretch and enjoy the off day and, like the way that we're playing, and then hopefully kind of continue to take another step forward when we get home on Tuesday.
As Schneider mentioned, today is a day off. Tomorrow, the Jays start a series against Kansas City, which is the beginning, Corey, of a very interesting stretch down the stretch. Toronto have 10 series remaining in this season. None of them are against teams with winning records. So this could get very, very interesting. As for the Winnipeg Goldeyes, they won yesterday over Sioux City they lost yesterday over Sioux City. They are still second place in their division.
Now let's head over to basketball now, where the Toronto Tempo were hoping a change of scenery would also bring a change of results.
Yeah, the Tempo took a 12-game losing streak into Vancouver, Corey, where they played a couple of games over the weekend. And the West Coast agreed with them, at least on Friday night, when they beat Portland and ended their long drought. Things did not go quite so well yesterday, with Toronto falling to Las Vegas. Still, a crowd of 16,000 took that game in, many of them young basketball players wearing Kia Nurse jerseys, and the veteran Canadian guard was asked what that feels like.
It's a very special feeling, and I don't think throughout my career I really felt it until the Toronto Tempo came into existence. I hope when they come to these games, the biggest thing is that they can see what they can be. A lot of us growing up were like, oh, we would love to play in the NBA because that was the only thing that we really saw. Now there's just availability to have an opportunity to just keep playing. Whether they make it all the way to WNBA or not, it's really important for their growth, and I hope that they can see that and how fun one piece of leather filled with air can be.
Yeah. It hasn't always been fun, Corey, on the court for the injury-riddled Tempo this season. Their star guard, Brittany Sykes, and their rebounding specialist, Anissa Morrow, both got hurt Friday in the game and will miss the rest of the season. Still, between the big turnouts the team received in Vancouver, Montreal, and, of course, in Toronto, it's pretty clear they've succeeded in their stated first season goal of positioning themselves as Canada's team.
Anything else catch your eye over? It was a pretty busy weekend at sports.
Yeah, it was golf. Brooke Henderson unable to repeat as the Canadian Open champion in Edmonton. She finished in 13th, but there were a number of impressive performances from players from this country. The best of the bunch, Vancouver's Anna Huang. She finished in a tie for 4th place. Japan's Miyu Yamashita won the event. And in footy, Corey, fans around the world woke up to a bit of a surprise yesterday. World Cup and Manchester City star Erling Haaland cut his hair off, and he shared that experience on social media.
This beautiful blonde hair, time to let it go. Season starts now, so it's time to get a fresh start and everything. The only thing is, Zlatan told me, never cut your hair because your strength is in your hair. I'm a bit nervous.
Zlatan Ibrahimovic, the Swedish striker with Samson-like locks, who was one of the greatest goal scorers the game's ever seen. So what did Zlatan think, Corey, when Erling showed off the new buzz cut to him?
Oh my God, what the f*** is this? You lost a bet or what? Oh my God, block me and erase my number, my friend. My wife says you're crazy.
Block me and erase my number. Ouch.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah, exactly. Double ouch, really, though, because playing ponytail free, Corey, Haaland went goalless yesterday for the first time in an opening match during his Manchester City career. So maybe Zlatan was onto something.
The strength was in his hair all along. Well, thank you very much, Scott.
You're welcome.
That's Scott Reguer at your CBC Sports Desk. Well, staying tuned here. Really interesting story coming up just ahead. We're going to dig deep into it with one of our I-Team reporters. Getting your ID scanned before entering bars and clubs is happening more and more across the country. But what happens with your personal information afterwards? We're going to hear the story about a Montreal-based lawyer who learned the hard way when she was labeled a public safety concern after an incident at a Winnipeg bar. That story coming up after your CBC News from Manitoba.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 7:30, a little bit soggy out there as we begin Monday. We will see later this morning a mix of sun and clouds. We're warming up to 26, and then there's a good chance we may see thunderstorms move in again this evening. A woman is raising questions about ID scanners and privacy after she was flagged by a Winnipeg bar as a nationwide public safety concern. CBC is only identifying Alexandra by first name because she fears professional repercussions by telling her story. The incident happened during a visit to Riverside Bar in St. Vital in June. After a couple of drinks, Alexandra felt sick and ran to the washroom. The next month, a venue at the Calgary Stampede scanned her ID and denied her entry. The Winnipeg bar had created a public flag across the country for other bars using the same scanner platform. The reason listed? Refusing to leave the men's washroom.
They labeled me as a serious public safety concern, which I did find to be quite outrageous. I mean, there are people who go into bars and assault people.
Riverside Management tells CBC the flag was a mistake and was supposed to only be done internally. After Alexandra reached out, they removed it and trained staff on their policy on using these flags. You can hear more on this story coming up in this next half hour of Information Radio. Members of Manitoba's U.S. Trade Council meet this afternoon. The Premier created the Council of Local Business and Labor Leaders last year to deal with President Trump's tariffs. Wab Kinew on Saturday said the group will get together again to discuss the impacts of these new 50% levies, as well as possible supports for businesses. Bram Strain heads up the Business Council of Manitoba and is also part of the U.S. Trade Council.
What the number one focus will be on workers and making sure that workers and people are supported, whether that be retraining, whether that be specific things like work share.
Work sharing helps employers and employees avoid layoffs when there's a slowdown in business. It provides income support to people temporarily working a reduced week. Now, a business owner in Winnipeg says he feels like collateral damage as Canada prepares to implement counter tariffs on U.S. goods. Derek Hurd at Evolution Wheel says the company has to import U.S. steel because there isn't supply of the type of steel he needs in Canada. He says this recent trade escalation has him considering moving the business across the border.
We're collateral or friendly fire, whichever you want to look at it. It's easy to call it a trade war, but again, our experience isn't that we're in a war, it's that we're dealing with friendly fire.
Canada's retaliatory tariffs will come into effect on September 8th. Honey producers in this province say they will feel the sting of those 50% tariffs. Ian Stepler at the Manitoba Beekeepers Association says he felt sick when trade talks between Canada and the U.S. collapsed. Stepler says producers are right in the middle of harvest, adding this is a terrible time for an escalation in the trade war.
This is the time of year that we need to sell our product to stay in business, and all of a sudden, a lot of producers in Manitoba, right across Canada, just lost one of our biggest buyers of our product.
Stepler says the U.S. accounts for half of the province's honey exports. You can hear the latest on the U.S. and Canada trade war coming up on World Report at 8. Celebrating 35 years of independence. But the occasion comes as war drags on. Manitoba's Ukrainian community marked Ukrainian Independence Day in West St. Paul. Orest Kapp at the Ukrainian Canadian Congress says events like yesterday's are especially important as that fight continues.
It's an opportunity for us to celebrate, to remind us of what is happening also in the Ukraine, and to assist with any humanitarian aid that Ukraine may have, so we want to make sure they're not forgotten.
Sunday's event was also a chance to raise money to support humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. The Royal Canadian Air Force is bidding farewell to one of its most symbolic fleets. The military is retiring Hercules 12 aircraft over decades of service, helping during humanitarian missions, wars, and most recently with wildfire evacuations. One of the Hercules was put on display in Winnipeg for the public to climb aboard one last time. Mike Starkey was among more than 100 people who were part of the event over the weekend.
They've done a lot of things in the different roles, throughout the service. So yeah, they will be missed. I mean, I will miss this.
Starkey worked with Hercules aircraft for more than 2 decades in the armed forces. The military's bringing in a new generation of planes specialized on search and rescue operations to replace the Hercules. You can find the latest Manitoba news updated throughout the day. Just head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That's Heather Wells at your CBC News desk. I'm Corey Funk, in for Marcy Marcusa. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio One. Well, let's take a look at your regional forecast here in Manitoba. 16 right now in Winnipeg at the Forks. Soggy morning so far, as you heard Heather say there. And there is still a bit of a risk of thunderstorms this morning, about a 60% chance or so. We are warming up to 26 today. It's going to be partly cloudy throughout the day. And then by the evening, late evening, another chance of a thunderstorm, about a 70% chance or so. It's going to dip down to 16 overnight, then warm up to 22 tomorrow with another chance of thunderstorms tomorrow as well. Heading to Brandon now, 17, warming up to 27 today. You also have about a 60% chance of thunderstorms this morning. And then going to be dipping down to 15 overnight, partly cloudy. And then by tomorrow morning, it might be another chance of rain as well, 30% chance or so of showers tomorrow with a high of 22. Steinbach, you're at 17 right now, warming up to 26. 60% chance of showers this morning or thunder showers. Very similar to Winnipeg, the forecast. Going to be kind of cloudy throughout the day. And then by the late evening, you're going to be seeing another 70% chance of thunderstorms and then warming up to 23 again tomorrow. And then chance of thunderstorms continues into tomorrow morning as well. Good morning to you, Thompson. 16 right now. You're warming up to 24 today. You also have a chance of thunderstorms this morning, just a 30% chance or so. And then tonight, also a 60% chance of thunder showers as well, which will continue into tomorrow. You're going to see a high of 23. Well, let's check in now with Sierra Sanders, who's in with a look at your commute. Hello.
Hi, Corey. Still a pretty quiet day out there so far from what I'm hearing. Haven't received any calls on the CBC commuter line so far. So to me, it sounds like your drive is moving pretty well out there. It has started to rain a little bit, or it has been raining in the last half hour. So it's a little slick out there. So you want to be aware of that. But so far, that's all I'm kind of keeping an eye on as well. Just wanted to let folks know about a closure there. Westbound Pandora Avenue West, or I guess I should just say westbound there. So all westbound lanes of Pandora Avenue between Day Street to Plessis Road will be closed for street construction until August 28th. But all westbound lanes will be open for morning rush hour. So they're accommodating the morning rush hour there. But after that, you want to expect delays in that area there. So all westbound lanes of Pandora Avenue between Day Street to Plessis Street will be closed from today until August 28th for some street construction. That's really the only thing I'm keeping an eye on. But if there is something that's popping up on your drive, no matter where you are here in the province or no matter how you're getting around, I'd love to hear from you. So give me a call on the CBC commuter line. That number is 204-788-3093.
Thank you very much, Sierra. That's Sierra Sanders, CBC studio director. Well, up next here on the show, Manitobans are saying goodbye to an iconic symbol of the Royal Canadian Air Force. The Canadian military is retiring its fleet of 12 Hercules aircrafts. The large planes have been used in conflict zones, rescue operations, and wildfire evacuations in northern Manitoba. It's now deemed to be surplus as a new generation of planes are taking over. For decades of service, yesterday the Royal Aviation Museum held a farewell display for the aircraft, and members of 17 Wing were there, including Major Tom Dolman. And he spoke to CBC's Santiago Arias Orozco.
The C-130, like the one behind us, is sort of our jack-of-all-trades aircraft. I like to compare it to a pickup truck. So it can do airlift, pick up cargo, It can carry passengers, and it can do search and rescue. In the past, we've used it for air-to-air refueling as well. We've used it all around the globe in conflict zones, humanitarian missions, and most recently we've used it here in Manitoba. Last summer we flew quite a few evacuations out of northern Manitoba, and even this spring we helped with some of the evacuations out of northern Ontario. This aircraft has been there. This aircraft has supported our allied nations either through NORAD or NATO. So we can land this aircraft in a very remote location like the communities up in northern Manitoba. We can quickly configure the aircraft to hold, anywhere from 60 to almost 100 people. We can land back at another airport, offload those people, quickly convert it to, say, take on pallets of cargo to fly into a community that could use those supplies. So the ability to quickly change its mission set is one of its biggest features. They've been deemed surplus. They're being replaced by the new CC-295 Kingfisher, which is a specific role search and rescue aircraft, which we already have 2 of here in Winnipeg, and a third one should be arriving soon.
That was Major Tom Dolman speaking about the Hercules aircraft retiring. And as you just heard there, the Hercules aircraft carried both cargo and people, but for some, it also holds a lot of memories.
Ben Friesen. Well, I used to work on them for 17 years. Also did some field service, so I could see the different military bases around the world, working on the engines. I wanted my daughter's name to mean something once I was gone, so I actually named her Allison after the engine that powers the Hercs. So.
It seems your connection with them runs deep.
Yes, yeah. I'm actually sad to see it go, but it had a good long life and very durable, reliable aircraft, and I was proud to work on the engines. It was early 50s technology back then, and once you see all the parts that come apart for like a fuel control or all the different systems, it was amazing technology for early 50s. I'm working on a different aircraft now, or different aircraft engine now, but this one's true to my heart.
Michael Starkey. I was a corporal. When we were in the Army, we had to learn to jump. So we did jumping out of the back of them, yes. From these type of aircrafts, yeah. And then fueling these aircrafts and maintenance kind of stuff. Yeah, I was posted in Toronto. I was with the tactical squadron refueling section. I got to go up in these aircrafts all the time, just because I was there. that was pretty well what you could say. It was always fun to be in there. I enjoyed my 22 and a half years of service.
I've never been inside a plane like that before. How would you describe it?
Sound-wise, it's loud. It's not to be an aircraft that you're going to sit inside and enjoy like a big passenger plane, that's for sure. But they are comfortable for the distance that you're going to be flying in. But inside, it's cozy. It is warm in the winter, as far as I can remember, because I was up in Baffin Island, flew up to Baffin Island in them. So yeah, it's a very versatile. It did everything. That's an aircraft that did everything in the service. It brought equipment in, it brought in people, it took people out, it brought people in. It was just an amazing aircraft. It's kind of sad to see it go, and even for me. I mean, back from the 70s to now, I mean, it's a landmark.
That was CBC's Santiago Arias Orozco speaking with some folks at the Royal Aviation Museum, where a Hercules aircraft was on display over the weekend. And the Royal Canadian Air Force is retiring its fleet of 12 Hercules aircrafts.
I'm Eric Westaver. I'm your local reporter for CBC in northern Manitoba, and you're listening to CBC Radio One.
Well, 7:43 right now, and you're going to stay tuned because after 8 o'clock, got a really interesting conversation coming up. Big question, does AI have any place in graphic design? That debate has been reignited online here in Winnipeg after someone posted their beer can from Nonsuch Brewery to Reddit because the label featured a 3-legged bird. So we're going to talk to the person who designed that can, who is themselves a graphic artist that says that they did use AI in the process of designing that. So what's the line there? That conversation coming up after 8 o'clock. But right now, though, let's keep talking about those new tariffs. It's a big shift in the economic and political relationship between Canada and the U.S., those new 50% tariffs in place once as of Friday night when those trade talks went south. And key sectors of the Canadian economy, automotive parts, steel, aluminum, copper, as well as lumber, continue to face ongoing steep tariffs of their own. And Dennis Darby is the CEO and president of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, which represents thousands of companies in our country. And he spoke with the Sunday Magazine host, Pia Chattopadhyay.
I guess, right now we're living in the worst of all worlds, because not only do we persist with the Section 232 tariffs, affects so many manufacturing industries, including those that use wood, steel, aluminum, copper, and build automobiles. So those persist, and now we have the new 50% tariff on another almost $28 billion worth of goods, which are all manufactured goods. So we're probably at the eye of the storm in terms of the impact of the current tariff and obviously the breakdown in the discussion between Canada and the U.S.
There are the practical realities, but there's also a lot of emotion to this. Businesses are run by people, by Canadians. How would you say people are holding up?
Well, right now, I think for the manufacturing sector and for the folks that work here, almost 1.8 million Canadians, and it's about a third of everything we trade. They're in a hard place right now. I think uncertainty is what is probably the biggest characteristic. And it's, yes, there are huge costs right now, and we've seen layoffs, we've seen reduction in exports, and we've seen companies, lose contracts, try to find new contracts, try to find ways around tariffs. But what it really speaks to right now is the longer term uncertainty. It's not like a company is suddenly going to stop making, particular whether a pump or a machine here in Canada today, but it's the next investment cycle if these tariffs persist. So, it's a lot. The confidence that manufacturers have right now is really at an all-time low, I would say, and people are worried.
So these new 50% tariffs, we're going to hear a lot of reference to Section 338. That's what they're sort of referred to. 338 tariffs. Where is the pain going to be, extraordinarily acute in our country?
Well, these are it's a bit of a mixed bag of products that the U.S. has targeted. Everything from electronics to electrical equipment to plastic and rubber products, furniture, as we heard earlier, bedding, machinery, chemicals, cosmetics, things like that, paper and paperboard, where Canada does provide an awful lot of paper packaging to the U.S., right down to beverages, spirits, and as we've seen in the news, hockey sticks. So it's a wide range of products that many of them are small businesses, and they're located all over Canada, and at a 50% tariff rate, what's particularly troubling, unlike the other tariffs that have been applied by the U.S., where they've applied tariffs to all of their trading partners, including the Section 232, the steel, aluminum, and tariffs in particular, these are only applied to Canada. So what happens is Canadian companies are going to be less able to compete with the U.S. And in fact, countries that perhaps aren't as integrated with the U.S. will have a better chance to get in the market. Because at 50%, two things are going to happen. One, either companies will not import the products, so consumers in the U.S. will not have access to these products, or the price will go up astronomically. And both of those are not great for the ongoing our ongoing sale to the U.S. because they are our biggest customer. We're their biggest customer, and they're our biggest customer as well.
That's Dennis Darby. He's the CEO and president of Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Well, 7:48 right now. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio One, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on our CBC Manitoba YouTube page. Well, up next here on the show, it's happening more and more at bars and clubs these days. A bouncer scans your ID before you're allowed to enter, and a Montreal-based lawyer learned how the information collected can end up following you to another province. She went to the Riverside Bar in Winnipeg this June and had a few drinks. She started feeling sick and ran to the nearest bathroom because she thought she was going to throw up. But what happened after this incident shocked her. The I-Team's Kristen Annabelle is here to tell us how this happened. Good morning.
Good morning.
So just tell us how this all started.
So the lawyer's name is Alexandra, and we're only identifying her by her first name just because of the professional repercussions for telling her story. And she told us that when she was in the bathroom, a worker knocked on the door, asked her to leave. She asked for a bit more time to gather herself, and then she left. But a month later, she went to a venue at the Calgary Stampede. Now, that venue in Calgary uses the same ID scanner as the Riverside in Winnipeg, and it's by a company called Patron Scan, and it's used worldwide. And when they denied her entry, she asked them to show them the flag, which she took a picture of, thankfully, and showed me. And it showed her name, that she was flagged a serious public safety concern, and the severity level was labeled serious. It said the venue was the Riverside in Winnipeg, and it gave a description of the incident, that she went into the men's bathroom and wouldn't leave. Here is Alexandra telling us how she felt when she learned this.
They labeled me as a serious public safety concern, which I did find to be quite outrageous. I mean, there are people who go into bars and assault people and start fights and do all sorts of horrible things. So the fact that they labeled me as a serious public safety concern for allegedly going into a closed stall in a men's washroom at a bar because I felt sick seemed pretty beyond the pale and outrageous to me.
Oh, it must have been really surprising to see. So what did she do next?
Alexandra's a lawyer, so she is familiar with privacy laws, and so she started making calls. And she reached out to the Riverside and Patron Scan to try and figure out what happened. And she was told that the flag was a mistake and it should have been done internally by Riverside management. They said they would remove it, but to her, it wasn't just about the flag anymore.
My initial concern was less so with the flag itself and more so with the fact that my data was being shared without my consent, that this flag had denied me entry at a establishment in a whole other province without my knowledge, without any transparency surrounding how this flag had been established, how my data was being shared.
So then this raises the question, what are the rules around how and when you can share information like this?
So private companies are governed by federal privacy laws, which say it's not unreasonable for a company to collect personal information for security reasons or to verify age. The law also says that companies have to inform people in a meaningful way why they are collecting this information and how it can be used. The law also says an organization must collect, use, or disclose it for a purpose, and I quote, that a reasonable person would consider are appropriate in the circumstances, end quote.
And how did the Winnipeg bar disclose to Alexandra what would happen with her information after the ID was scanned?
So Alexandra said she was not told how this information could be used, and she didn't see a sign that explained it. The Riverside does have a sign. It's below the scanner, and not everyone would necessarily see it, which privacy experts that we spoke to said this is sort of how you get into a gray area about whether the individual was fully informed. The sign, which has a Patron Scan logo, says that if there's no incident, someone's name, date of birth, gender, photo, and postal code will be stored for 21 days in the system and then deleted. But if there is an incident where someone is violent or otherwise, and I quote, undesirable from a safety perspective, this information can be kept and shared with other venues that use Patron Scan. Here's Crystal Shore, a privacy expert at the University of Waterloo, talking about her concerns with this.
The glaring issue in that language to me is the word undesirable, right? That's, what do we mean by undesirable? Undesirable to whom? And in what context? And I think that language that's being used there really speaks to the core function of the technology. It's not necessarily about verification at that point. We're looking at a surveillance system that's looking to classify people based on their risk, right? Based on perceived risk by whoever it is that's working at the establishment at that particular moment, right?
So then why does Patron Scan allow for bars to create public flags that are shared like this?
The idea behind the flag network is that it makes bars safer. that someone who's dealing drugs or a gang member can be flagged by one bar so another bar knows not to let them in. It sort of takes the onus off the worker or the bouncer because they can just look at the flag and say, sorry, I can't let you in. In Vancouver, a bar watch program has been running for over a decade, and it's a network of 46 bars and clubs, and they all use patron scan, and they connect with each other so that they can ban someone who has been deemed to be dangerous or harassing people, and they have policies for when someone is given a public flag, and they work with the Vancouver police. Curtis Robinson is the chair of the Bar Watch program and a former police officer, and he says these public flags, when used responsibly, make workers and patrons safer. And he said if people have concerns about their information being shared, then they just shouldn't go to a Bar Watch bar.
What we do is when we recognize that we're dealing with a person involved in violent crime, gangsters, etc., or those, for example, that have a history of sexual assault, rape, or other things, it's important that we make sure that our bars are safe by ensuring that when a person is entered into the patron scan system, that all our bars and clubs and restaurants, all 46, are protected. So that person just can't go to one bar and get kicked out and put on a system and go to another one.
So what did Patron Scan and the Riverside Bar say about the incident?
So, as I said earlier, the Riverside said the public flag was a mistake. And after Alexandra went to them, they said they trained their staff on the policy around flagging someone with Patron Scan. But they said the bigger story is that these small businesses have to spend money on a platform like Patron Scan to combat rising crime in the city. Patron Scan, which is based in Calgary, said the signage explaining how the data is used is mandatory for clients, and it has been updated following various privacy commissioner reviews as needed. They said it is extremely important that their software is used responsibly in order to keep their staff and patrons safe.
And so what's next now for Alexandra?
So what she told me is that she plans to file an official complaint to the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. They're the agent of Parliament which oversees the compliance of Canada's privacy laws. And they can make recommendations to the company and to the bar on how to better comply with privacy laws.
Well, Kristen, thanks for your time this morning. Thanks for bringing us this story.
You're welcome.
That is Kristen Annabelle. She's a reporter with CBC Manitoba's I-Team, and she'll have more on this story tonight on the CBC News at 6. You can also read about it on our website right now, cbc.ca/Manitoba. Well, 7:56 right now here on Information Radio. I'm Corey Funk in for Marcy Maracusa. And let's check in now on your forecast. Right now in Winnipeg, we're sitting at 26. We're heading towards 26. We're heading at 16 right now at the Forks, heading for a high today of 26. There's still about a 60% chance of showers. There's already been showers this morning here, been soggy out there, but also still a chance of thunderstorms coming our way right now and then later this evening as well. And still to come here on the show, super interesting discussion coming our way. Does AI have any place in graphic design? And that debate, as mentioned, it's been hot online here in Winnipeg because of a three-legged bird that showed up on a beer can from Non-Such Brewery. Someone flagged that, and now there's big discussions happening about whether AI was used in there. And actually, we're going to talk with the artist behind that can who says, yes, it was, but he was still an artist behind it. He just used a certain program to put it all together. So that discussion coming up about what role does AI use? What does he think it should be? So that conversation coming up as well. We're going to talk to the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce to talk about the impacts here in our city from those 50% tariffs that just came into effect over the weekend. So stay tuned for that. But right now, though, let's check in with Heather Wells with a look at news headlines. Good morning.
Well, Manitoba's U.S. Trade Council meets this afternoon to talk about the trade war and those 50% tariffs the U.S. imposed over the weekend. Members of the council come from a range of industries, sectors, and labor groups in Manitoba. Bram Strain at the Business Council of Manitoba says they are going to discuss impacts to specific businesses and supports to help those businesses weather the storm. Honey producers, meanwhile, say they will feel the sting of the 50% tariffs. Ian Stepler at the Manitoba Beekeepers Association says producers are right in the middle of harvest, and this is a terrible time for an escalation in the trade war. I'll be back with more Manitoba news coming up at 8:30.
Thank you very much, Heather. Well, as for your commute, very quiet commute overall out there. I haven't heard of any major issues yet, but you can always give Sierra a call on the commuter line. 204-788-3093 is the number to call. I'm Corey Funk in for Marcy Marcusa. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio One. We'll be back after World Report. See you then.
Today on Q.
Kacey Musgraves is an 8-time Grammy winner, considered one of the finest songwriters of her generation. And in a rare interview, she talks about her journey from championship yodeler to winning Album of the Year at the Grammys and the inspiration behind her latest album.
Everybody wants to be a cowgirl. Q. This morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland. And on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts. The most important stories of the day from the places where they are happening. The news that matters in your community, your country, your world. It's news that belongs to you. Your World Tonight. Every evening, 7 days a week. On CBC Radio One, CBC Listen, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Martina Fitzgerald. Canadians will be crunching the numbers this week, figuring out how the U.S. trade war will affect them. Over the weekend, talks collapsed. New 50% tariffs on certain Canadian exports to the U.S. have kicked in. Ottawa will respond with retaliatory levies set to happen after Labor Day. As Kyle Bax tells us, Canadian companies already fear a further loss of sales and jobs.
That last check, when it clears, will be the last one I get from the USA right now.
A difficult month for Ron Kubek keeps getting worse. Lightning Rock Winery in Summerland, BC was evacuated because of wildfires. And now the owner says new tariffs by the Trump administration mean his sales into the U.S. are gone.
It just makes it tougher this morning to do business and to figure out where we're going.
The new 50% tariffs impact about $28 billion worth of Canadian goods shipped to the U.S., from electronics and furniture to clothing and honey.
Over time, that'll mean the firms affected by those tariffs will sell less into the United States. And that may mean they'll have to cut back on the number of workers that are employed.
Economist Trevor Toome with the University of Calgary estimates the new tariffs could result in 90,000 job losses.
If they remain in place for some time, then over the longer term, that's where the job losses mount, and that's where, on our side, we'll see consumer prices rise.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has vowed to respond and place tariffs on U.S. products entering Canada. For Quebec, that could mean higher costs for supplies such as glass and cardboard.
And so we're just worried about the retaliatory tariffs that the Prime Minister puts on, because that'll affect the cost of winemaking.
For now, he hopes the escalating trade war is a wake-up call for provincial premiers to work harder to reduce trade barriers within the country. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Calgary.
The Prime Minister will speak later today. Mark Carney is expected to announce supports for businesses being affected by these new tariffs. This morning, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne told our colleagues at Radio Canada that it will include grants and loans. He did not provide a timetable for the rollout. While both sides of this dispute are reportedly still communicating, there is no sense of when Canada and the U.S. could officially restart talks. As Steve Futterman explains, Americans are also facing the prospect of tariff-related price hikes, and they could come at a crucial time for the White House.
While Donald Trump said very little this weekend, his transportation secretary on Sunday was in full attack mode.
It's a country that doesn't have a military. It has a country that has a single-payer healthcare system that's failing.
Sean Duffy said the tariffs will be devastating for the Canadian economy and predicted Mark Carney will be forced to come back to the negotiating table. Duffy's comments about the military brought some quick blowback. Retired former U.S. commanding general in Europe, Ben Hodges, characterized them as embarrassing. There is plenty of vocal opposition to the tariffs. These comments on Sunday by former Vice President Mike Pence.
My hope is, for the sake of American families, that what we're looking at here is negotiation and not confrontation.
And with the midterm elections a bit more than 2 months away, it could hurt some Republican candidates.
His policies are actively compounding the problem they elected him to solve, which was getting control of their cost of living.
CNN political analyst Ron Brownstein says many voters are blaming Trump for rising prices. Already one Republican senator facing a tough re-election battle, Susan Collins of Maine, is critical of the tariffs. She says they will increase costs for those in her state. Steve Futterman, CBC News, Los Angeles.
The diplomatic friction between Ottawa and Washington was on full display with the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Now, new documents obtained by CBC News show the American owner of a competing key route met with senior Canadian officials prior to the bridge's opening. Colin Butler has this exclusive report.
I don't know that there is a comparable.
Lori Troutman studies the Canada-U.S. border at Western Washington University. She's talking about Windsor-Detroit, where the privately owned Ambassador Bridge now sits beside the publicly owned Gordie Howe Bridge.
It creates a whole different layer, I think, of diplomacy. It's not necessarily about better accessibility or more efficiency for trade flows. It's about profit.
CBC News has learned that as the Gordie Howe prepared to open, senior Canadian government officials met privately in April with the ambassador's American owner Matthew Maroon at his request. The details contained in briefing notes obtained by CBC through the Access to Information Act. But much of what was discussed remains blacked out. Maroon didn't respond to a request for comment. What we do know is 11 days after the meeting, the Ambassador Bridge lowered its tolls below the rates of Gordie Howe.
It's not surprising.
That's University of Windsor political science professor John Sutcliffe. The Maroon family fought for decades to protect its lucrative Ambassador Bridge monopoly. They couldn't stop the Gordie Howe.
I mean, you have a classic case of a moving from a monopoly situation to one where there's competition, and therefore prices come down.
Ottawa says the meeting was routine. The circumstances, though, were anything but. A billionaire, a new competitor, a bridge caught in a fight with the White House. Ottawa listened, but what Maroon wanted them to hear remains secret. Colin Butler, CBC News, London, Ontario.
The Hungarian military is investigating why one of its warplanes crashed today. It happened near the city of Szolnok, southeast of Budapest. No one was injured, and there is no word on the cause. Officials say the pilot tried to avoid hitting civilian areas. The plane that went down was a Swedish-made Gripen fighter jet. Hungary has been flying the C model since 2001. Canada has been considering the purchase of the newer Gripen E to help modernize its air force. In Ukraine,
35-та річниця. Державне свято.
President Volodymyr Zelensky addresses his nation as it marks 35 years of separation from the Soviet Union. Zelensky says Ukrainians know the value of independence as they fight against Russian aggression, adding, although his country wants peace, he will not give in.
Good morning, Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
British Prime Minister Andy Burnham is among the world leaders attending Independence Day ceremonies in Kyiv. He's there to chair his first meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, which Canada is also part of. New Zealand's government is taking steps to ban social media for kids under 16.
And I won't pretend that it will be simple or that it will be perfect. We won't get every single child off social media. Some will always find ways around it. But frankly, it's just way too important not to at least try.
Prime Minister Christopher Luxon is calling out tech giants such as Meta, TikTok, and Snapchat for exposing young people to harmful and addictive content. He's tabled new legislation today that would require social media platforms to verify the ages of users through things like facial recognition or digital ID. New Zealand has a coalition government. It's not clear if other parties will support the bill. Australia was the first country to implement a social media ban last December. Canada tabled similar legislation in June. Experts in Canada say social media is also playing a role in the declining mental health of teens here. The findings, part of new data out this morning, gathered from thousands of Ontario students. As Tashana Reid explains, researchers say while mental health struggles for youth are still prevalent, there are signs a shift may be happening.
Schools closed, their friends are asleep, their parents are asleep, and there's nobody else.
Kids Help Phone says more and more young people are reaching out for help at night when they feel most alone. In the first half of this year, Canada's Free Mental Health Crisis Service says it saw a 24% increase in the volume of overnight texts compared to last year. Rebecca Shields is CEO of Kids Help Phone.
And predominantly the number one issue is anxiety and stress.
Something also looked at in a new report by the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. It took a closer look at the health of 10,000 students in Ontario between grades 7 and 12. In an anonymous online survey, 46% of students reported experiencing moderate to serious levels of psychological distress. A slight decrease, says Haley Hamilton, a senior scientist at CAMH.
So the numbers that we're seeing now in 2025 is more similar to the number that we saw in 2019, pre-pandemic.
Researchers don't know why there's been a decrease, but say distress levels are still nearly double compared to over a decade ago.
I think it's recognizing that we still have a long way to go.
Shields says social media, AI, online bullying, and exploitation has made things even more challenging for today's youth.
Young people, are resilient, but they're also faced with unprecedented challenges, and that's why we all have to work together to ensure that they have the support that they need.
Researchers say more students also reported speaking with a professional for their mental health, an encouraging sign. Tashana Reid, CBC News, Toronto.
That is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm Martina Fitzgerald. This is CBC News.
Well, good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio One, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on the CBC Manitoba YouTube page. I'm Corey Funk, in for Marcy Marcusa. Right now in Winnipeg, we're sitting at 16 degrees, warming up to 26 today. And might get 2 thunderstorms in one day. 60% chance of thunderstorms this morning. About a 70% chance of thunderstorms later tonight. We'll get details just ahead. Coming up this hour on Information Radio, how a 3-legged bird on a beer can got Winnipeggers on Reddit fired up, and the explanation from the graphic designer who confirmed he did use AI in his design process. We're going to hear from him coming up later this half hour. Also, Manitoba businesses are bracing for 50% tariffs after Canada walked away from trade talks with the U.S. So what now? Well, the head of Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce is going to join us just ahead here on Information Radio. Stay tuned. 8:11 right now. Let's check in with Heather Wells with a look at news headlines.
Good morning. Well, members of the province's U.S. Trade Council meet this afternoon. The Premier created that council of local business and labor leaders last year to deal with President Trump's tariffs. Wab Kinew on Saturday saying the group is going to get together to discuss the impacts of these new levies as well as possible supports for business. A woman is raising questions about ID scanners and privacy after she was flagged by a Winnipeg bar as a nationwide public safety concern. The incident happened after a visit to Riverside Bar in St. Vital in June. After a couple of drinks, she felt sick. She ran to the washroom. The very next month, a venue at the Calgary Stampede scanned her ID and denied her entry. We'll hear more coming up in our next local news at 8:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thanks.
That's Heather Wells at your CBC News Desk. As mentioned, 16 right now. It's been a bit of a soggy morning here in Winnipeg. We are warming up to 26 today. You can expect it to be pretty cloudy throughout the day. There is still a bit of a 60% chance of showers this morning. And then as the evening settles in later, about a 70% chance of thunderstorms. Now, actually, that chance of thunderstorms and showers is going to continue into tomorrow morning as well here in the city. Up in Thompson, actually, pretty much right across the province, very similar forecast as well. 16 right now, heading up to 24 today. 30% chance of showers and thunderstorms this morning. Also chance of showers and thunderstorms later tonight. Well, let's check in now with Sierra Sanders, who's in with a look at your commute. Hello.
Hi, Corey. It has been pretty quiet on the commuter line today. I haven't received any calls so far on this show. So to me, it sounds like folks out there are getting around pretty smoothly. Things are moving along out there. But one thing that the Winnipeg Traffic Management Centre is keeping an eye on is northbound Pembina approaching Jubilee. There's a stall blocking the northbound curb lane, so you want to keep right to pass there. So northbound Pembina approaching Jubilee, there's a stalled car blocking the northbound curb lane, so you want to keep right to pass there. So far, that's the only thing really I'm keeping my eye on, as well as the Winnipeg Traffic Management Centre. But we do still have some time left in the show. So if there is something that's getting in your way, I'd love to hear from you. So give me a call on that CBC commuter line. The number is 204-788-3093.
Well, up first here on the show, Canadian businesses and industry leaders have been standing by Prime Minister Mark Carney and his decision to suspend trade talks with U.S. President Donald Trump. And it comes as negotiations to avoid 50% tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Canadian exports broke down late Friday night. Now, Carney says the U.S. made, quote, unfair last-minute changes to the deal. And this now means 50% tariffs on many Canadian goods are now in effect, with retaliatory tariffs from Canada coming into effect after Labor Day. Lauren Remillard is the president and CEO of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce, and he's a member of a provincial U.S. Trade Council that's scheduled to meet with Premier Wab Kinew later today at 4 p.m. Good morning.
Good morning.
So this trade war with the U.S. has been going on for some time now. What went through your mind when the talks broke down on Friday?
Obviously, disappointment, shocked. All of us, based on the information that was being provided heading into that deadline, really felt optimistic based on, again, messaging and information that really we were at the stage of just crossing T's, dotting I's and sort of thing. But as we, the hours crept by, there started to be a sense of something's clearly not working, not going well. And then, of course, when word came down that Canada had broken off talks for good reasons, then we move into, okay, what are the next steps? How do we rally behind that Team Canada approach and find a way through this?
So you've said the Chamber supports the Prime Minister's decision to walk away from this latest trade deal despite the potential impacts of the local economy. Why?
Absolutely. We're Winnipeggers, Manitobans, but we're Canadians. And as the Prime Minister has said from the onset, no deal is better than a bad deal. And we need to make sure that we secure not just an agreement that works, that protects businesses, protects our workers and our communities, but has, staying power, that you can start to make investments with confidence. But that's very difficult to do, even if you negotiated somewhat decent terms, when that agreement, as the Prime Minister has rightfully noted, is written in pencil and already on things that you had agreed to verbally. When that agreement came down to writing, the terms had changed unilaterally. So absolutely, we need a deal that we can all have confidence in, that puts Canada in the best position possible. If we can't secure that, then better to walk away and resume negotiations when cooler heads south of the border reemerge.
So you've been hearing from businesses since that news broke about these 50% tariffs. How are people impacted?
Well, today, many businesses are waking up to take a look at their contingency plans. Definitely something that from the onset of the pandemic through to, of course, the new administration being sworn in. This has been almost a daily occurrence for business, having to anticipate prospective changes in supply chains, costs, customer base. This is the new reality. So today, many businesses, unfortunately, are finding themselves having to say, in the event it stays at 50%, what do we do? But there's also the unknown as to when Canada institutes its counter tariffs. The U.S. has been very clear. Any measures against U.S. action will be met with countermeasures of their own. So today it's 50%. We do also have to brace ourselves for retaliatory action by the U.S. So right now there's a lot of hand wringing.
We've heard, the bulk of the impacts is aimed at Ontario, Quebec, BC, but just can you give us a sense of just how big or widespread the impact is here in Winnipeg and in Manitoba in general from these tariffs on businesses?
Yes. So you mentioned the top three provinces. To put it in perspective, and again, this is just at the 50% tariffs, not taking into account potential U.S. countermeasures. Ontario was anticipated to have an impact in about 9% of their exports. Manitoba is one of the also highest impacted provinces, with 5.2% of our exports currently set to be impacted by those 50% tariffs. And we're talking in and around $500 to $600 million worth of our exports that will now face these unjust tariffs. So it is significant. We know there's going to be financial pain borne by businesses, workers, and our communities. It is why we really do appreciate the programming that has been put in place by the federal government up to this point, and why we're cautiously optimistic, but as well somewhat confident that we do have assurances from the federal government that there will be more programming in place as those impacts, we better understand those impacts and as they start to be felt in our community. So we may be in this for a long time. Prolonged trade war, we need to make sure that all parts of our economy are working together. And that also, the biggest thing we can do is really come together as a single market economy of 41 million people, $2.5 trillion. Now is the time to reduce interprovincial trade barriers.
And how soon is our Manitoba business going to need some kind of help from either the province or the feds? Like, when are they going to start feeling it?
Well, it's early days. It's hard to say definitively. I think right now we do have a bit of a window where we can start anticipating scenarios and potential responses by various levels of government. But right now, our hope is that the Prime Minister has also created a window of opportunity of 2 weeks for a return to the negotiation table. But that requires the Americans to come back and negotiate in good faith and honor agreements, honor terms that have been agreed to when it comes to actually putting pen to paper. So there's still a level of optimism that we could potentially avert not only this trade dispute moment in time, but an escalation, and that we can actually get back to what is ultimately the bigger prize, and that's the renewal of CUSMA.
And Premier Wab Kinew says the province will announce supports for Manitoban businesses this coming week. What kind of supports would you like to see from the province specifically?
Well, we are looking a little bit at the programming that was put in place during the pandemic, everything from the emergency business accounts to allow businesses to have cash flow as some of their customer base evaporates, predominantly in the United States. Also looking at wage support so that companies can retain their workforce, keep them employed, minimize the impact in terms of layoffs, because we know how devastating that is to families and communities. Companies want to keep their workers gainfully employed, hoping that this is going to be a short dispute with the United States and we can get back to somewhat normalcy. So it just gives you some of the ideas. But again, what we need right now, this is a very fluid situation with the United States. You never know what one day brings to the next. We need governments across the board to be very responsive. And that's why today's U.S. Trade Council is going to be a good opportunity for us to sit down and saying, here's some initial thinking, but also there's potential for changes down the road that we need to be flexible around.
But we'll leave it there. Busy day ahead for you. Thank you very much, Lauren, for joining us.
Thank you.
Lauren Remillard is the president and CEO of the Business Chamber, Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce.
I'm Jura McElwraith, your local reporter for CBC Manitoba in Steinbach. You're listening to CBC Radio One.
Well, up next here on the show, a three-legged bird on a can of beer has ignited a debate online. Nonsuch Brewing's Hazy IPA features a design of tropical plants, flowers, and animals like birds and butterflies. But when one Reddit user noticed a bird that didn't look quite right, they uploaded a photo to the r/Winnipeg page on Reddit, writing, quote, "Nonsuch using AI, boo. Slop inside and out. I'm sure you can find a real artist to design your can. Note the 3 legs on the bird," unquote. And the comments flooded in, many echoing their disappointment. And 2 hours later, the artist behind the can responded. Ty Johnson is a co-founder of the brand artist of Nonsuch Brewing, and he joins us now over Zoom. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi.
So let's just start with the three-legged bird. How did it get there?
It got there through a design process that included AI, and it feels like I think a lot of people right there might be tuning me out entirely because it almost feels like they want me to admit that I was using AI.
And so tell me more about that design process. So it sounds like you identify as an artist and you use AI in your process. I know it's a program called Upscale, which ultimately caused those 3 legs to show up. So what is upscaling, and why do graphic designers like yourself use it?
I also should just backtrack quickly. I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to have a conversation about this topic. I really appreciate when people care about art and design, and even if we see things differently, I always prefer passion over apathy. And I also genuinely welcome other perspectives to kind of challenge and temper my ideas as long as they're offered in good faith and constructive, in a constructive environment. I've kind of put a target on my back by coming forward and talking about this. So I know that didn't quite answer your question.
No,
there,
that's fair. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the reaction's been and how you've been dealing with that. But just to kind of lay the groundwork here, just tell us a little bit about, the upscale and how it works and how you use it in your artistic process.
Well, so there's a bunch of different ways you can use AI in your design process. You can use it to generate art. You can use it to generate a piece entirely or components of a piece. In this case, I used a generative upscaler as a part of my process. So I would have drawn kind of a sketch first, taken that into Adobe Illustrator and made some rough vector shapes. Then I would have made a digital composition using stock photos. This was 2 or 3 years ago that I designed this one. And then you might notice that some of your different photos don't have the same lighting on them, or they don't have the same pixel density. So you'd use a generative upscaler to not only upscale the artwork, but also kind of unify the way that the items are rendered. And in this case, it rendered an extra leg, and that's why we're here.
So, was there a way to do this without AI, or why did you want to use the upscale in the first place?
I think it's a new technology, and the ability to increase the quality and kind I said, to unify all the elements at once is a really strong ability that AI upscalers have. I used one that was called Magnifique at the time. It's been bought and repurposed like everything else in the AI world right now.
And how did you feel when you first actually noticed the bird with 3 legs on the can?
Oh, I was embarrassed. I mean, as a graphic designer, every single typo that I put out, every single error that I put out, it's just oh man, because it goes out to all these people. So I quickly changed it, updated the label, but there are clearly some old ones floating around there.
Did you notice it yourself just while you were having a drink or something like that, or was it the Reddit post that pointed out to you?
No. We saw this years ago at our first quality assurance meeting when we put through and went, oh geez, that's embarrassing.
Okay, but you're still hey, let's put it on the can and so.
Well, we didn't want to throw them in the trash. That didn't feel like the right move there. Yeah.
So just take us to the moment where you were made aware of this post on Reddit. How did it feel to read some of those comments?
So truthfully, I haven't read any of the comments. A friend of mine shared a screenshot with me, and he said, "Hey, do you know that this is happening?" And I said, "I don't know." I was about an hour outside of where cell service, and I was just on the fringe of having any cell service. So I thought, oh man, I need to put something out there. So I typed up the response that you saw. I posted in my response, I said, I'm not going to look at the comments because I like to talk about these things. I haven't found a lot of dogpiling negativity. I've seen people leaving 1-star Google reviews for my restaurant, which sucks for the staff there. So it's harder for me to see the positivity in that. So I don't really get into it in the comments. I do a lot of other community-based work. I'm the president of the Community Association, and we have issues that come up all the time as well. And I found that we've decided to not get into it in the comments. It's not the place for constructive conversation.
So why do you think people got so passionate about this in particular, use of AI on your beer cans?
I'm not sure. The more I talk to people, the more I understand, and I quite enjoy that. I also feel like I should kind of interject for just a second and say that if I don't denounce all of these terrible things about AI, I think there are a lot of people just raging on me right now. I hate AI data centers, the power hungry billionaire Epstein class who owns them. I hate the lack of regulation around AI. I hate how it replaces people rather than empowering them. It's unclear the energy use for training versus usage. It turns young people's brains off. Shout out to Wab Kinu's proposed AI ban for those under 16. And I also dislike how AI is a marketing term for machine learning that encompasses both AI slop, like this three-legged bird, and technology that makes new cancer treatment drugs. I feel sorry to again interject there, but
and so I'm even curious, like after this incident, or even leading up to now, like and right now, how do you think about the role that in terms of just art, that small section of where AI has now plays a role now too? What do you think the role is or should be in AI after all these kind of conversations, which I think has forced you probably to think about it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot. I was really quick to jump onto the AI train and learn what these tools are doing. I think every year or two, I've been a graphic designer for 22 years. Every year there's a new tool or technology that comes out and lets people do things that they couldn't do before, or lets people do things faster. And I don't think we can ever point to a particular technology and say that's not real art. It doesn't matter about the medium. For me, it's about how the artist made it. I think art is more of a how than a what. And you can kind of look back at, like, in the 1990s, stock photos were criticized when people started using stock photos. Roger Ebert spent years insisting that video games could never be art. In the 1980s, like, sampling in rap music production was dismissed as not real music. Electronic music was dismissed from day one. And, like, even if you go back to the invention of photography, painters dismissed it as a mechanical reproduction, saying that the sun is making the image, not the artist, so how could it possibly be art? So we've been here before many times, and like I said, it's not about, in my opinion, any particular technology that makes things art or design. It's the care and the character that the artists put into their work. So
you think there still is a place for AI in art?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just like any other technology, I mean, if there wasn't that template of, like I said, this has happened many, many times. It'll probably happen many times again. I think people kind of decide during their formative years what is and what isn't art, and then something comes along and they say that fits outside of my understanding, and yeah.
Well, Ty, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perspective this morning. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Ty Johnson is a co-founder and the brand artist of Nonsuch Brewing here in Winnipeg. Time now for your CBC News from Manitoba.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 8:31, the rain seems to have left for now. 16 degrees is where we're at. We're headed to 26. That's warmer than normal for this time of year. Good chance, though, we will see thunderstorms later this evening. A woman is raising questions about ID scanners and privacy after she was flagged by a Winnipeg bar as a nationwide public safety concern. CBC is only using Alexandra by her first name because she fears professional repercussions by telling her story. The incident happened during a visit to Riverside Bar in St. Vital in June. After a couple of drinks, Alexandra felt sick and ran to the washroom. The next month, a venue at the Calgary Stampede scanned her ID and denied her entry. The Winnipeg bar had created a public flag across the country for other bars using the same scanner platform. The reason listed, refusing to leave the men's washroom.
They labeled me as a serious public safety concern, which I did find to be quite outrageous. I mean, there are people who go into bars and assault people.
Riverside management tells CBC the flag was a mistake and was supposed to be done just internally. After Alexandra reached out, they removed it and trained staff on their policy on using these flags. Well, Canadians are entering a new work week under a new trade war. Over the weekend, fresh 50% U.S. tariffs kicked in on $28 billion worth of Canadian exports. Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will respond dollar for dollar after Labor Day. He is also expected to announce new supports for Canadian businesses hit hard by the trade dispute. A Winnipeg business owner says he feels like collateral damage. Derek Hurd at Evolution Wheel says the company has to import U.S. steel because there isn't supply for the type of steel he needs in Canada. He says the recent escalation has him considering moving the business across the border.
We're collateral or friendly fire, whichever you want to look at it. It's easy to call it a trade war, but again, our experience isn't that we're in a war, it's that we're dealing with friendly fire.
Canada's retaliatory tariffs come into place September 8th. The head of the Manitoba Beekeepers Association says a lot of producers have lost a major market for their honey.
To be honest, I woke up and heard the news, and just that pit in the stomach formed.
That is Association's chair, Ian Stepler. He says this is a bad time for these 50% tariffs. Producers are in the middle of harvest. Stepler says a significant amount of honey is sold south of the border. He says the U.S. accounts for around half of Manitoba's honey exports. Now, Manitoba's U.S. Trade Council meets this afternoon to talk about the trade war. The council was created last year in response to President Trump's tariffs. Members come from a range of industries, sectors, and labor groups. Bram Strain at the Business Council of Manitoba is one of the members.
We're going to discuss a lot of direct impacts to specific businesses and what these new tariffs mean. And then, of course, what corresponding programming or supports may be necessary to weather the storm.
Strain says it will take time to figure out a path forward because diversifying to new markets doesn't happen quickly. Marking 35 years of independence during a war. Many Ukrainians gathered in West St. Paul yesterday at a cultural event organized by the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. 4 years on in this war, Ruslan Zelnyk, representing a humanitarian organization supporting Ukrainians, hopes people aren't forgetting about the war.
It's sad to hear that sometimes the people is saying, you know what, actually, we don't know that Ukraine already won or the war is stopped. No, it's not. And it's a full scale of war is going back to Ukraine.
Zelnyk says the event not only raised money for those affected by the ongoing war, but was also a celebration for lives lost since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. The Royal Canadian Air Force is retiring 12 Hercules aircraft after decades of service. Major Tom Dolman has flown the Hercules for years. He says the fleet is like the jack of all trades in military aviation, capable of assisting military deployments, but it's also been most recently used during search operations and wildfire evacuations in Manitoba.
Definitely a little bit sentimental to see the aircraft go, but change is inevitable as well. We're looking forward to bringing in our new CC-295 Kingfisher and bringing forward all the capabilities of that aircraft.
A Hercules plane was on display in Winnipeg over the weekend. More than 100 people climbed aboard the main cabin and cockpit to see it one last time before it joins a museum display. You can find more Manitoba news updated throughout the day. Just head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
Sierra Sanders is in with a quick look at your commute. Hello.
Hi, Corey. Got a call from Paul. He was calling about southbound Waverley between Chevrier and Scurfield there. There was a dump truck stalled in the right lane, kind of right in front of the fire hall there as you're heading down southbound Waverley. So you wanted to keep left to pass there. As well, just reminding folks about westbound Pandora Avenue, that closure there. So all westbound lanes of Pandora Avenue between Day Street to Plessis Street will be closed for street construction until the 28th. But all westbound lanes will be open for morning rush hour, but you do want to expect delays throughout there.
Thank you very much, Sierra. Well, today on Radio Noon, they're asking you, do you believe Prime Minister Mark Carney made the right decision to walk away from trade talks with the United States? You can call in to Radio Noon at 12:15 to share your thoughts. That's coming up later on today. I'm Corey Funk, in for Marcy Marcus. I'll be here with you all week. See you tomorrow. The Current is next.